I don't care if you've cured cancer, solved world hunger, or are the best husband in the world. Nobody will ever love you as much as Arthur Smith loves Jonnu Smith. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 19 team in my power rankings heading into the 2025 NFL season. As today we take a deep dive into the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team who hopes that their quest to add Aaron Rodgers certainly goes better than what happened in the previous 2 years with the New York Jets, a team that did burn me quite bad. We'll see how this one ages, but very much looking forward to today's deep dive. I do actually find the Steelers team quite fascinating, despite the fact that I think many fans are tired of this team going 9-8 and losing early in the playoffs every single season. I think that outcome is very much possible for this team, but at least they really shook things up this offseason. A lot of moving pieces to talk about, which should make today's deep dive pretty fun. Also, guys, for those following the series, I'm going to be changing up the format a little bit. Instead of starting right here with the full list of offseason changes, some people had commented like, hey, I think that kind of spoils some stuff. So instead of doing it all at the forefront, I'm going to be kind of building that offseason changes graphic throughout the course of the video. So kind of before we get into each individual segment, we'll talk about what's changed. Did they upgrade? Did they downgrade at that specific position group? And I think it's going to flow much better. So definitely let me know in the comments down below if you like this change, if you dislike this change. It will be easy enough to go right back to the old format if you guys don't like it, but I hope you guys enjoy this little change. But with that, that means we are going to begin these videos with the coaching and scheme breakdown, set all that up, and then get right into the roster. So let's go about it. Before we do get started, if you could take just a second to hit that like button, it really does help me out. And of course, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these deep dives as we lead up to the number one team in my power rankings. But let's get into the Steelers coaching staff, a very familiar one, as Mike Tomlin, the longest tenured NFL head coach, heading into year 19 here. As last year, he continued what is quite possibly the most impressive active streak in the NFL, where Mike Tomlin has had 18 consecutive non-losing seasons. He's never had a losing season as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, 18 for 18 there. And there's been some questions in previous seasons after Big Ben retired if that was going to come, and he has continued to just raise the floor of this football team, inspire confidence that this team can overachieve in many ways. But at the same time, it has almost become a tired conversation for many people, and I think there's been this kind of lack of buzz with Mike Tomlin as a head coach, this kind of general impatience where I think a lot of people do feel like that streak is becoming maybe a little overrated, in the sense that the way they go about their business here, yes, does get them to 8-8, 9-8, 10-6, when we were still playing 16 games. And there is an aspect that is impressive to that. And I still do give Mike Tomlin a ton of credit, for example, with my overall coach and culture ranking, where the Steelers are inside the top 5 in the NFL, despite being our 19th overall team, with an A grade there. And that is really what you think of with Mike Tomlin, is his leadership and just kind of taking command of the locker room and having a vision for his football team that does raise the floor. But ever since they won that Super Bowl in 2009, I mean, they weren't able to get over the hump with Big Ben and Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, the Killer Bees era. Never won a Super Bowl. And in recent seasons, it has been just the consistent purgatory, really, of going 9-8, getting into the playoffs, sneaking in, keeping that record alive, keeping his job, but then nobody really taking them seriously and them losing in the first round of the playoffs. And I think that's just kind of run stale for many, many people. And, Mike Tomlin for me ranks as the 9th overall head coach. I still think a lot of Mike Tomlin, but he has fallen in those rankings a little bit. And I do share some of that sentiment where I think, yeah, we have seen like the Kevin O'Connells and Matt LaFleur's of the world, kind of from the new era of football, these sort of scheme lord types, if you will, maybe those guys have kind of passed up Mike Tomlin in the sense that those guys also bring a great culture to the building, but also understand the X's and O's of football at a really, truly elite advanced level. Not that Mike Tomlin does not understand X's and O's. Do not take that wrong. But there are some guys, some head coaches in the league that I do think are doing this at an even higher level. And it's really up to Mike Tomlin to kind of get over the hump here. And it's starting to feel like the clock maybe is ticking in sort of a Andy Reid in Philadelphia type of way, where maybe this does reach a point where it's just time for a change of scenery. That can be healthy for so many people in sports in different aspects. So I'm not saying that is going to happen, but if this team doesn't maybe make the playoffs and generate some real noise this year, it could be that, okay, they got aggressive, they made some trades, they go after Aaron Rodgers, they did kind of shake some stuff up this offseason to maybe change the script that has been so consistent for this Steelers team, maybe take on a little bit more risk, but hopefully invite a little bit more upside with this team too. I think this offseason had at least a little bit of that, and we'll just have to kind of wait and see where that goes. But because Mike Tomlin does have a defensive background, and this defense is ultimately going to be in his vision, I think it makes sense to start with the defensive coaching side of things, and then we'll talk about Arthur Smith and the offense, and that'll be a nice transition right into the roster breakdown where we, of course, start with the offense. But it is ultimately Terrell Austin as the defensive coordinator here. He begins his fourth season after getting promoted in 2022, after working here for the Steelers under Keith Butler before that. But let's be honest, you guys didn't click on this video to get the hot take from me that the Steelers are good at coaching on defense. That is really what this staff is known for. It's what they've done consistently over the years. I think their ability to be at least good, if not great on defense every single year, is why this non-losing season streak has been allowed to happen despite the turnover at quarterback and so many other things. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that the Steelers rank very favorably for their defensive coaching rankings for me in this series. They get a B+ grade, tied for 7th in pass defense coaching, and an A- grade, tied for 4th in run defense coaching. So they absolutely are in good hands as far as the talent in charge of coaching this defense. I think much more interestingly, let's talk about the scheme here in Pittsburgh, where it is in so many ways a traditional defense. It has, of course, evolved over the years. It's had to. I mean, you go back, watch any football game in 2007, 2008, just rewatch that 2009 Super Bowl Classic against Kurt Warner, which even then, they were, kind of a modern passing game by that time standards. But anyway, when Mike Tomlin started, he was a part of an older era of football. I know it can be tough to look at it that way, but the evolution of the passing game and play action and RPOs and the rule changes, football today is not what it was in 2007. It looks vastly different. So they have had to evolve in terms of how often they run nickel and some of the types of coverages they run, pressing a little bit less with their cornerbacks. But in so many ways, this is a traditional defense compared to so many of today's defenses. I would say like 3/4 of the league are in some form of that two shell, call it Fangio, McDonald, Saleh, all those coaching trees that have permeated throughout the league. Pretty much everybody wants to live in two shell and prevent big plays and rotate their safeties and all that kind of stuff. The Steelers, not so much. They run about as little quarters coverage as anybody in the league. They were at 5.5% quarters coverage last year, 6.4% cover 6. They do run cover 2. They will rotate into cover 2 much more than they will run quarters. They ran 12% cover 2. But this is, at the end of the day, a single hide structured defense. They ran cover 1, man-to-man, 30% of the time. They ran cover 3 almost 40% of the time. So that's about 70% of their plays right there, single high structured stuff. And then on top of that, We call this the Blitzburgh defense. Well, they aren't necessarily at the very top of the league in blitz rate. Those tend to be the teams that don't have a lot of talent and are desperate and have to blitz to get after the quarterback. They're a little bit more balanced in that sense, but they were 12th in blitz rate last season. So that's kind of who they've been, a single high, relatively blitz heavy defense. And another thing that stands out to me about the way that they call their defense is on early downs, they are not afraid to come out and get into a base 3-4 defense. Sidebar, their base defense was actually more of a 4-3 last year. TJ Watt actually put his hand in the dirt a lot, so it was a 3-4 defense by personnel-wise, but it was charted as 4-3 because it was more of a 4-3 underfront that they based out of last year for the most part. But just about 25% base defense last year. Again, that was 10th most in the NFL in terms of not being afraid to come out with 4 defensive backs on the field, commit to stopping the run on early downs, and 30% of those base defensive calls, they blitzed, be it a cover 1 blitz or a cover 3 fire zone. But their mentality is very much to be aggressive on early downs, to plug every gap, to play north and south, to come after opposing offenses. And I think that has had pros and cons. Like, I think the downside to this is reflected in that pass defense coaching ranking where it's just a B+ grade. It just ranks 7th to 12th. Well, we have actually seen play action teams and smart teams come out and find holes in this defense in what has been a bit of a predictable early downs defense over the years. And if you're going to come out in a base defense with just 4 defensive backs and you're going to blitz out of those fronts, yeah, you're going to ask a lot of your secondary and you're going to create some holes in the second level. So good teams are going to be able to have some game plan specific big days against this defense. Now, they still finished 7th in final defensive DVOA, and once they do get you into third downs, they're very, very good. But that's kind of the drawback, right? Is that it is kind of a boom or bust style on early downs, but I also don't hate that all the time too, because all of these play action oriented passing games, their philosophy is like, hey, we want you rushing east and west. We want you afraid of the run on early downs. And the Steelers don't play afraid of the run. They're going to get after you, and they can disrupt your play action passing game with their blitz heavy attack in many of their games as well. But I don't hate it in the sense of just get to third down. Like, okay, if it's first down and they drop a 15-yard play action pass over the top of your head, yeah, it might hurt your total yards allowed and your final metrics and all that stuff. But from just a how you want to live defensively point of view, you don't want to be in 2nd and 2. You don't want to be in 2nd and 4. That's the worst place to be. So play aggressive, hopefully get you into, 2nd and 8, 3rd and 7, where you can get into your nickel defenses and know that the opponent's going to pass. Again, I think this has its ups and downs as a philosophy, but I think it's, at least for the players, it's a fun defense to be a part of, certainly, with that overall mentality. But then, yeah, once they do get you into third down, they are traditional as well in the sense of they run cover 1, they run cover 3, they will blitz out of those single high structures, and that's the world they want to live in. Now, they've had to get into a little bit more off-zone, zone match style stuff just because of the rules. You can't be as grabby with pre-snap motion. It can be tough to run a lot of press man. So we've seen this be a pretty off-zone cover 3 match, fire zone oriented defense in many cases. But again, for the most part, that has really worked for them. So there's your kind of defensive overview. They are, of course, in very good hands here in Pittsburgh. Let's talk about the offensive coaching with Arthur Smith. And Arthur Smith is one of the most memed, hated on offensive coordinators and coaches in general in the entire league. Whereas I kind of go the other way. I think he is overhated and honestly a pretty good offensive coordinator, especially for a team that is going to have a CEO/defensive minded head coach. To have a solid mind in the building and to have a guy that isn't going to be at risk really of getting hired as a head coach elsewhere anytime soon, at least, as he did fail in Atlanta as a head coach. I think that is an asset to this Steelers team. And even last year, despite an offensive line that was really banged up and probably in the bottom 10, and, a QB carousel with Justin Fields, who can be a frustrating quarterback to call your offense for at times because of how he sees the field, and Russell Wilson, who was okay, started good, finished poor, and really having George Pickens and nobody else to throw the football to, the Steelers still finished inside the top 20 in offense last year. So even last year, the results were there as a team that probably outperformed their core roster talent. But he gets all this hate for what happened in Atlanta. And was he a good head coach? No, I think he did struggle with so many of the culture building aspects that, say, a Mike Tomlin is so great at. And it did ultimately cost him his job in Atlanta. But at the end of the day, those offenses were good in Atlanta. They by far shattered expectations based on who their quarterbacks were, with Desmond Ridder and Heineke, and he had a year of Matt Ryan, a shell of Matt Ryan, right? I'm not confusing my timelines here. He had Matt Ryan the year before. He went to Indianapolis, where we all saw what that looked like. So he, needless to say, did not have good quarterbacks in Atlanta either, and they were still always kind of sniffing the top 12 and top 15 in total offensive efficiency, which was really impressive. And he got so much hate because of the fantasy community, with Kyle Pitts and all of his expectations. Kind of frustrations with people saying, why are you only using Kyle Pitts as a decoy? And I got frustrated with him at times for that too, as a Kyle Pitts fantasy owner. But hey, looking back on it, maybe Arthur Smith was onto something in that Jonnu Smith might be the better tight end. He certainly was last year in Miami compared to Kyle Pitts in Atlanta without Arthur Smith there. And then, some of the Bijan Robinson usage was frustrating at times. I will give the Arthur Smith haters that. And not to spend too much time on what happened in Atlanta here, but I do think the overall plan was to not overuse Bijan Robinson. But I think when they used Bijan was quite frustrating. I think there were critical moments where they would go to Tyler Algier where Bijan should have been in there, and that was relative criticism. So I'm not saying the guy is perfect, obviously, but generally speaking, and you go all the way back to Tennessee too, where those Ryan Tannehill offenses were top 10. So he has consistently performed as an offensive coordinator. And again, that was the same last year. For this team to still be top 20 as an offense, those were solid to good results. So I will continue to defend Arthur Smith against the haters, and I understand there's going to be some people in the comments coming after me for that, but I'm just calling it like I see it. So for the coaching rankings here for the Steelers, from a run game coaching perspective, I have them sniffing the top 10, 8th to 11th, with a B+ grade for run game coaching. I think that is where Arthur Smith is at his best, installing his wide zone-based run game, which I will discuss the scheme a little bit further here in a second. But from a pass game coaching aspect, that I already would say Arthur Smith is not as good in the pass game design as he is in the run game design. I wouldn't say he's poor designing his pass game, but that would have been a B- grade, which would have been just kind of hardly around top 20. However, I do think we have to mention the Aaron Rodgers factor here. We saw this with the Jets. Their pass game design was as ancient and hard to watch, really under Aaron Rodgers' say, as any in the league last year. And I think that is the most relevant drawback of Aaron Rodgers being your quarterback, is he has a certain way that he wants to play offense, specifically speaking, force feeding back shoulder comebacks, in many ways avoiding throws over the middle of the field. And I do think that has to be factored in here. So where they would otherwise be a B- grade and more inside the top 20, they do get hit a little bit for the Aaron Rodgers factor. Now it's a C+ grade for pass game coaching, 22nd to 30th. I will say that the Jets let Aaron do whatever he wanted. That's not going to be the case here in Pittsburgh. Arthur Smith is a strong mind. Mike Tomlin is a strong mind. I think the overall philosophy of Aaron Rodgers signing here on a cheap one-year deal is a bit of an acceptance that he's going to come in and do things the Steelers way. So I think it's a bit of a bridge between the disaster with the Jets, where it was basically just Aaron Rodgers calling plays with his yes man and Nate Hackett as the offensive coordinator that the Jets literally weren't allowed to fire because of Aaron Rodgers' influence on the organization. I think there's a middle ground here where Rodgers will come in and run an offense like Matt LaFleur very much forced Rodgers to, at least on early downs, run the offense. Let LaFleur call the plays. Don't change the play at the line of scrimmage. There was so much narrative surrounding that. I think, at least in Pittsburgh, there's going to be more of that. And I think Rodgers is more accepting of that, considering he knows how badly it failed last year with him basically running the offense in New York. And hell, Arthur Smith worked with Matt LaFleur in Tennessee in 2018. So that influence is very much relevant. And the scheme is very much the same in many ways. At least the core principles and the terminology is going to be very much the same. So I don't think it's going to completely destroy the ability for the Steelers to have a, well-called offense. But there is inevitably going to be some of those third downs where Rodgers does get the power, where he probably does avoid the middle of the field, where he probably does force the ball to the outside. That is inevitably going to lead to some frustrations, which at this point is just a part of Aaron Rodgers being your quarterback. So they do get dinged a little bit for the pass game coaching, certainly. But let's finish up this segment by discussing the scheme here. And it is, as I've hinted at, very much in the Shanahan family of those heavy personnel, wide zone, play action oriented offenses. But Arthur Smith at this point, probably more than anybody in the league, loves to run his version of this offense out of 12 and even 13 personnel, really leaning into those single back, heavy tight end formations with 2 or 3 tight ends on the field. We've seen all of the McVay disciples be very 11 personnel oriented offenses where they want that kind of big slot wide receiver to be your sort of extra blocker, if you will. We've talked in this series about the idea of 11 and a half personnel with your Cooper Kupps and Jawan Jennings types of wide receivers. Kyle Shanahan himself has actually been much more of a 21 personnel style offense with the use of that fullback with Kyle Juszczyk, whereas again, Arthur Smith wants that single back look. And whereas some teams, we will say, well, this is what they've done in the past, maybe they're going to change that up this year. In the case of Arthur Smith and the Steelers, it is a full commitment to that 12 and 13 personnel-based offense. As we'll see in just a little bit here, this offense is built to run 13 personnel. They have 3 tight ends now after acquiring Jonnu Smith, Arthur Smith's guy, in a trade. And then it's really a wide receiver core with DK Metcalf and a motley crew of adequacy at best. So we are going to see a lot of 3 tight ends on the field with that running back and DK Metcalf out there, who he himself is built like a tight end. So they are going to come out and smash you. I would wager the Steelers are in the top 5 in run-pass balance in favor of how much they run the ball. Aaron Rodgers himself has talked about how he wants to hand the ball off a lot. And I think that's a big reason why he came here, because of that commitment to the run game. And I would bet my mortgage that the Pittsburgh Steelers lead the league in 13 personnel this year, now going to get an extra tight end in there. They already led the league in 13 last year by 1 against the Arizona Cardinals. And then I would even bet the Steelers are, with that, also like top 10 in 12 personnel. So last year they were first in 13 personnel and 11th in 12 personnel. That is what Arthur Smith has always been about, and they are not making any mistakes about it this year. So a heavy dose of the wide zone run game, hopefully mixing in some balance of duo and counter into that, as Arthur Smith has been pretty good at having those change-ups. He does call as much wide zone as anybody in the league, but he understands the kind of right time when he kind of gets linemen leaning into the wide zone. He kind of gets you going one way. He'll mix in those counters to keep you honest and to hit gap runs at the right time. And that's a part of the favorable run game coaching that I give Arthur Smith. He just has an excellent feel for coaching the run game and calling the run game. But then, of course, the threat of play action off of that. And having these kind of unique athletes like a Jonnu Smith is a big part of this. Like, they've got Pat Freiermuth, they've got Washington, who's interesting, but if you're going to come out and get teams into base defenses and play these heavy packages, you want some speed from your tight end room. You don't want that to totally come at the compromise of run blocking, though, and that's why he likes Jonnu Smith so much. We'll talk more about, the weapons breakdown and all that, but it ties hand in hand with the scheme for sure. So if they're going to get you coming upfield or keying into the wide zone, play fakes really heavily, he wants a guy like a Jonnu Smith that can get open over the top of linebackers' heads and pull away from linebackers and safeties even on these crossing routes. And Jonnu showed he can still do that with Miami. He had a career year in Miami last year. And, Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington can do some of that stuff too. But obviously, he wanted that core scheme element here, and he went and got it in that trade that involved also, obviously, Jalen Ramsey and Minkah Fitzpatrick. So there's your Arthur Smith system and your coaching staff overall. I do think the Steelers are obviously in very good hands here, even if there has been a little bit of a narrative that things are getting a bit stale with Mike Tomlin at the helm here. I think it's still better to have Mike Tomlin than not. Though I don't totally disagree with those saying, hey, it might be time for a change of scenery, especially if things don't go great here this season. Now, before we do break this roster down, I do want to thank the sponsor for today's deep dive, SeatGeek, the #1 ticketing app for good reason. They help you guarantee you get the most bang for your buck. Their app, their user interface is fantastic. They color code every seat. They give you an image of what your seat's going to look like. A seamless process that, as long as you look for those green dots, you know you are getting the best bang for your buck. You get the tickets right in your app. Pair that with the best customer service among all the ticketing apps. You can have a stress-free approach to the gate. Go have some fun this summer, you guys, whether you're in Pittsburgh or like me in Minnesota. So many of us have to deal with the winter months on the horizon. Go get some sunshine. Go see a ball game. MLB, as of this recording, is beginning the second half of their season. Go have some fun. Buy your tickets on SeatGeek, and when you do, use code TFG10. You'll even save up to $20 on your next purchase. You'll support my channel in the process. And I hope you all have a fantastic time wherever it is that you are headed. All right, let's get into the roster breakdown here. And like I said, we're doing things differently for this episode. I want your feedback on this format change here. But as we lead into every position group, we are going to build up the offseason changes graphic. So with the quarterback here, a lot of change, obviously. Both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields started games for this team last year. Both are, in their own right, moderate losses. They did what they could for this team last year, but not huge losses. And they go in and bring Aaron Rodgers, a major addition for this team. I do consider Rodgers an upgrade over Russell Wilson, as we'll discuss. Certainly an upgrade over Justin Fields. And then they do bring Mason Rudolph back as a backup here and draft Will Howard in the 6th round, who we'll have to talk about. So I don't consider this a major upgrade from what they had last year, but I do at least consider it slightly upgraded going to Aaron Rodgers here. And I fully understand that there is not a more hated player in the NFL than Aaron Rodgers. And I'm not blind. I've seen that the consensus narrative on Aaron Rodgers is that he's a washed up old man, that he sucks now, he can't throw the football anymore, and frankly, that this was a bad signing for the Steelers and that this can't work out to a degree. I understand that that's the narrative on him, and I, as much as anybody, understands basically the crossfire that I'm putting myself in front of defending Aaron Rodgers at all at this point. But I do have eyeballs, and I did watch the film. In fact, I watched all 17 Jets games last year, and you guys, I understand all the drama that comes with signing Aaron Rodgers, and I already talked about the negative impact he has on your pass game design and some of the stuff that comes with his approach to quarterbacking the position. But just evaluating Aaron Rodgers in his cleats on the football field, he's still a solid, useful starting quarterback that has traits to like at this position, even if he does have some pretty major deficiencies at this point at 41 years old. I think so many people think that Aaron Rodgers is like the 40th best quarterback in the league, if not worse, and that this was a complete waste of time and a guaranteed disaster. And the film on Aaron Rodgers last year just does not tell you that picture. In fact, many of the analytics and stats on Aaron Rodgers would tell you that he was even better than the 21st overall quarterback, which is where I have him heading into this 2025 season at 41 years old. But fifth in turnover-worthy play percentage in a good sense. 39th lowest out of 44 in a good sense, if you get what I'm saying. Big-time throw percentage was still inside the top 20. Right next to Matthew Stafford, CJ Stroud, Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams, Drake May. He is still able to make some really high-leverage NFL-caliber throws deep down the field. Threw 28 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. He finished the season with 3,900 passing yards. That was 14th most in the league. Am I out here trying to say that he is anything close to what he was in his prime, where he was one of the best quarterbacks to ever play this position? No, he's not. His mobility is shot. His arm talent is still very good, but he can't get away with all of the throws he used to, and he's never been a mechanically sound thrower, so he does miss more throws than he used to, where he used to be arguably the most accurate quarterback in the league, maybe outside of Tom Brady. But as I mentioned, he still can make every throw that you could possibly ask of your starting quarterback. He still has good NFL arm strength because he's coming down from having an elite NFL arm. And he does still have, to me, on film, what has always been his superpower in his pocket presence. Does he have the high-end mobility to always capitalize on it with high-end play extension like he used to? No, but he can still sense the pressure, manage the pocket, step up, step left, step right, buy an angle for a tackle, buy time to extend plays where he is lethal keeping his eyes downfield. And even in the second half of the season, we saw him get better and better at this, where I think we saw him trust his ankle much more and be more mobile than he was certainly in the first 6-7 weeks of the season, where it was like eye-opening, where he was just standing in the pocket, afraid to get hit, basically. Like, we saw a more confident, mobile version of Aaron Rodgers in the last 6-7 weeks of the season, where I think so many people just stopped watching the Jets entirely. So that makes sense why they didn't see that version of Aaron Rodgers and don't think it's there. But it was. And I'm almost talking myself into the idea that he's going to play a lot better than he did last year, that this ranking on him, 76 overall rating, 21st overall quarterback, that he could actually play a good bit better than that. I do believe that he can. And maybe I just got burned by this so bad last year, where I had the Jets 5th in my overall power rankings and really bought in on that team being a Super Bowl contender. Maybe I'm just hedging against that a little bit by not putting the up arrow on Rodgers and ranking him inside the top 20. But I would be lying if I said I don't think he can play like a top 20 quarterback this upcoming season. I do think it's possible, especially if he is buying back into an Arthur Smith designing the offense for him, humbling himself a little bit in terms of not being the coach, GM, and quarterback of the team. Just come in and be the quarterback, play focused, play motivated on in an elite culture like the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's going to feel, I think, culture-wise, very much like home. I think Green Bay and Pittsburgh have always had parallels in terms of their legacy and kind of how they lean into the historic notion of their football team and just being great cultures in general. It's going to be much closer to that than what he had with the Jets. So that's where I'm at with the signing. I think Aaron Rodgers can play like a top 24 quarterback in the league. I think he can distribute the offense, play a little bit better within play action and buy into that a little bit more, and ultimately get this Steelers team to the playoffs, probably not win a Super Bowl, right? Like, he just doesn't have those traits to go toe-to-toe with the big four elite quarterbacks all in the AFC. That's just a lot to ask of this Steelers team and of Aaron Rodgers. But like Rodgers has discussed himself, can he come in, have a solid season, go out, quote-unquote, on top on a playoff team where he didn't get all this negative energy and just kind of let that be the last chapter in the Aaron Rodgers book that I like to think 10 years from now we'll remember probably the best 6-year run of quarterback play that we've ever seen. Patrick Mahomes contingent, I suppose. I think that's kind of the rosy outlook. Is there a side where this goes south? Yeah, I suppose. Is there a chance he gets hurt at 41 years old as well? Like, yeah, it's probably in there as well. So there is a floor to be considered with this signing as well. But as a 1-year, $10 million deal, I think this does all kind of make sense. And I think he can give them the best quarterback play they've had since Ben Roethlisberger. Is that not a reasonable and effective way to kind of wrap up this Aaron Rodgers conversation? I think so, at least. So if you guys think I'm still being too optimistic about Aaron Rodgers, that's fine. Let me know it in the comments. It's just my honest opinion on this signing and kind of what they can expect from Aaron Rodgers. But beyond that, you got Mason Rudolph. I mean, in most situations, I would say, yeah, if you go to Mason Rudolph, who's a career backup type, the season's over. But in the case of the Pittsburgh Steelers, we've seen them still put together playoff caliber teams with Mason Rudolph and Mason Rudolph caliber quarterbacks. So technically speaking, can they continue to win games 20-17 and sneak things out and pull off their black magic as they've done? Technically speaking, yes. He's a career backup type, but he can run the offense, as we know. And I expect him to be QB2 this year, not Will Howard. I know there's a lot of hype around Will Howard. I like the idea of drafting Will Howard in the 6th round. He was a fascinating prospect where he's big, he's a decent athlete, he's got a strong arm, and he's kind of an interesting dart throw because something really clicked for him. The quarterback he was really for the entire regular season at Ohio State looked like, a Joe Schmo transfer from, was it Kansas State, I think. Did not play well in the regular season for Ohio State, but when the lights got brightest and the playoffs rolled around, he looked like a real NFL passer. So if something clicked for Will Howard and you give him a year to kind of sit and learn from an Aaron Rodgers in a good culture like this, is there a world where he shatters expectations as a 6th round pick? I think relative to where he got drafted, there is an element of upside to that draft pick that he could be more than Mason Rudolph, for example. But maybe he is kind of your long-term cheap Mason Rudolph replacement. So a good draft pick for a 6th round. And is there a 5% chance he is your starter in 2026 as this team kind of sees what they have and maybe does do a little bit of a reset after going for it a little bit more with Aaron Rodgers here? Maybe. Not saying that's for sure going to happen, but there's a chance. So again, 21st at quarterback. That's where I'm at with it. Let's go ahead and discuss who they have to throw to here and if this group has enough to kind of do what I described and have Aaron Rodgers play okay and sort of ride off into the sunset. So we'll start with the offseason changes with this group. And I ultimately said slightly upgraded with everything they did. They move on from George Pickens and bring in DK Metcalf. I like George Pickens a lot, and I think you could even argue Pickens and Metcalf are about the same caliber of wide receiver. But just like I talked about the loss of DK Metcalf with Seattle, there is a bonus factor with getting a DK Metcalf, and I think if this team's going to live in so much 12 and 13 personnel, you still have to keep safeties honest and respect the verticality aspect of DK Metcalf, even in a way that George Pickens didn't necessarily threaten. So if that makes sense, I think these guys are very similar caliber wide receivers, but you do get that bonus fear factor from DK Metcalf, even if he comes with some inconsistencies in his game as well. And then on top of that, I do think the Steelers kind of going to get DK and then trading away George Pickens. I think they also look at this as a bit of a quality of life addition. Yeah, DK Metcalf can be a little frisky and get some penalties. And, I'm not going to act like he is free of any sort of, what's the right word here? Not character concerns, but noise, where I'm going with this. DK Metcalf isn't free of that, but I do think in terms of accountability and having to stay on top of him day to day and just kind of being a head case, I don't think they're as worried about that with DK Metcalf. I think Metcalf, generally speaking, is highly praised for his football character, whereas there are some questions with that with George Pickens. They've managed it well, and I still think a lot of George Pickens, but yeah, I think they see that extra verticality aspect with Metcalf, with the speed, and not having to babysit him as much. It's like, if we're going to pay one of these guys $33 million a year, we'd rather it be DK Metcalf if he's out there and available. And they paid a second-round pick to go make that swap, which isn't nothing. But all of that together really accounts for me to say slightly upgraded at wide receiver, because the rest of this for any other team would just be moving around depth pieces. Now, Van Jefferson had to play here last year, 64% of the snaps, and Robert Woods is going to come in and play a good bit for this Steelers team as well. Neither of those moved the needle for me in terms of additions or losses, along with Mike Williams, who came in and played 15% of their snaps last year. So again, slightly upgraded this offseason, I think, at wide receiver. And then tight end, I think, is much more straightforward. They did have Michael Pruitt in that Jonnu Smith role in this Arthur Smith offense, and then they're able to go get Jonnu Smith seemingly as a tack on to the trade that involved them sending Minkah Fitzpatrick for Jalen Ramsey. If you want my overall thoughts on that trade, I do actually really like that trade for the Steelers. They caught some flack for it, but I definitely see what they are going for here, obviously with what we're going to discuss with Jonnu here, and then even more so with Jalen Ramsey when we get to the secondary there. But yeah, I do see this as an upgrade. Jonnu had a huge year last year, so you pair that with some slight upgrades at wide receiver, and I do think this team has more to work with the weapons than they had last season. And that leaves them, for me, ranking with a B- grade, 22nd to 26th in the league. A league very deep with weapons. Seemingly most teams have a nice group of weapons to throw to. And in the case of the Steelers, DK Metcalf is doing a lot of heavy lifting towards that ranking. I do really like DK Metcalf. I've kind of gone back and forth with him. Like, I've heavily praised him at times. I thought he should have been a lock top 15 pick coming out in the draft. And I've obviously praised him a lot in Seattle and discussed how big of a loss I think it was for Seattle to lose the sort of X factor that he brings to the table, as we described, with how defenses have to respect his vertical ability. Like, if you don't either play off coverage or shade a safety over the top, he is a 60-yard touchdown waiting to happen. And modern defenses hate that shit. So you have to play the Steelers now a certain way with DK Metcalf in there. Like, his size, speed, vertical threat ability, it speaks for itself. But at the same time, he's had a lot of frustrations. For a player that looks like this, you would assume we are talking about one of the better contested catch ball winners in the league, to be something like what Mike Williams has been on his career, or a T. Higgins, Mike Evans, like these vertical X wide receivers that win tough catches on the boundary. Your quarterback gets in a pinch on third down, just launch it out to DK Metcalf, see if he can make a play. And Metcalf has actually very quietly, although I think this narrative around him has become more discussed since he's been traded, the last 2 years, DK Metcalf has seen more contested catch targets than any receiver in the league, at 72 contested catch targets over the last 2 years. Yet he's only converted 33% of those. So that has led to a lot of inefficiency in the Seahawks offense. Now, in 2022, he did catch 51%. In his rookie season, he did catch 53% and 48% in 2020. So, like, 3 years ago, he was doing that type of stuff, earned that respect, started to see all of those targets, and he hasn't been able to convert these. And I don't think he's the best at kind of tracking the ball, adjusting his speed to run under the ball and find himself in the best position. He does not work back to the ball, and he doesn't always kind of elevate and attack the football. You know, there's smaller receivers. You think of like Tyreek Hill and like Stephon Diggs, smaller, more slender receivers. Those guys elevate and attack the football. They high point the football. Metcalf is physically capable of doing that, but he doesn't always do it. So maybe they can coach him up a little bit better and get him to do that better. But He has had his deficiencies that have held him back from being sort of a top 10 true number one wide receiver. Now, does he have the skill set to quote unquote be your best wide receiver if you build the rest of your room appropriately around him? Yes, absolutely. And we've even seen that at times in Seattle. And certainly here in Pittsburgh, he is going to be in every bit their number one wide receiver. He might be in the top 3 in targets this season. I don't know if the Steelers are quite going to pass enough to be that, but I do think he'll be in the top 3 in terms of percentage of targets in the passing game. And if you want to talk a little fantasy football for a second, I'm big on what DK Metcalf is going to do this year. And maybe that's in large part because I do think Aaron Rodgers can still throw the football and push the ball downfield and utilize a DK Metcalf. But yeah, I love drafting DK Metcalf, and especially if you're playing like best ball drafts on underdog, or if you want to do his season-long number, which right now is under 1,000 yards. That is a pick I really like on underdog. If you've got a couple other season-long ones you want to pair with that, DK to get 950 yards feels very obtainable to me. So I will remind you guys, if you want to play best ball or season-long pick 'em on underdog, sign up using code TFG. They'll give you a bonus match up to $1,000, and you'll support my channel in the process. But yeah, Metcalf is definitely someone I'm targeting in fantasy football. And there is one other thing before we talk about the rest of this group, which isn't going to be the longest of conversations with the rest of these guys, but I obviously think for how they're going to use DK Metcalf and a lot of the throws Aaron Rodgers can still make, he's gonna have a success. And I like that, for example, that 949 yard mark for him. I think he can get more than that one way or another, but there is room potentially for him to take that leap to being more of a true alpha, like number one type of wide receiver. And I think it comes with sort of the chemistry with an Aaron Rodgers. Now, it gets a little murky because Rodgers is probably only going to play 1 year here, but there have been some frustrations with Metcalf in terms of some of those timing routes, whether it's comebackers or getting to the right place at the right time on a dig route where Geno would trust that Metcalf would be there, and Metcalf would just end up either slowing his route or not getting there in time for one reason or another. And those balls would end up in the hands of safeties because he's just throwing it into space where it then goes to the second or the third level and safeties would pick it off. So if Metcalf can really lock in and get on the same page with Rodgers with specifically back shoulder comebacks and all of the different hand signal stuff that Aaron Rodgers is always going to do with his receivers, if he can become that mind meld wide receiver like Rodgers has had with Devontae Adams in the past, that could be an area of Metcalf's game that is a next step that he hasn't always had. The proper timing and chemistry with the quarterbacks he's had in Seattle, I don't think it's always been the quarterback's fault though. So I think that could be an area that leads to some frustrations as well within this offense, though there is upside for him to work at that stuff too. So that's just something I'm very interested to see with him in this passing game. But yeah, the rest of this group, I mean, the rest of the weapons we can really go through pretty quick. They bring in Robert Woods to be a blocker here, basically. He's not going to be efficient. I don't even think he's going to get that many targets, but he has been in these Shanahan-style offenses, and he is a tough dude. They signed him for a reason, and he is, I think, in many ways going to frustratingly take a lot of snaps away from more explosive options like Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson, but he is going to play here, and he's going to be a veteran wide receiver that Rodgers can trust. He's always kind of had one or two of these guys that's going to be in the right place at the right time. And I think he's going to have his usefulness for what he is, but he's a 33-year-old wide receiver that hasn't been really efficient for years now. Then you have Calvin Austin, who I think will be kind of a 1-and-1 split with Robert Woods. Austin's going to be much more of the explosive option other than DK Metcalf. And certainly when they get into 11 personnel on true passing downs, he can run some of those go balls and digs and deep crosses. And I do think Calvin Austin is going to have some big games. But if the Steelers are able to live in the game script that they want to, which is going to be heavy personnel and frankly more of a simplified third down passing game with Aaron Rodgers, for the most part, just working with DK Metcalf, I think there's going to be games where Austin just goes catchless, honestly, kind of as we've seen. I think he's talented. I do. He's an undersized wide receiver, but he can get open deep. I like his route running. There's a world for him to carve out more of a role as a true slot wide receiver on third downs. That would probably be his best path to being a kind of breakout player and a productive option for this team, is to fully beat out Roman Wilson as the sort of Randall Cobb for Aaron Rodgers, the guy that can get open on a 3rd and 5 and present himself to the quarterback in scramble drill. But it is Roman Wilson in year 2 here that I think makes that complicated. Like, I think these two guys eat into each other's reps from the slot along with Robert Woods. It's just going to be a big rotation with these guys. And I think Roman Wilson, who's ironically my pro comp on him was Randall Cobb, there is a chance for him to work here and be much better in year 2 than he was in year 1. You know, as a 3rd round pick, he didn't even get on the field. He was a healthy scratch at times. It was one of the biggest eye-opening questions of a guy that seemed to have a high floor coming out of Michigan, maybe not the highest ceiling, and that's kind of why he went in the 3rd round. But the fact that he really wasn't able to get on the field for a group of weapons that didn't have a lot of options, it was interesting to say the least. So he's got to kind of figure things out and get on the field. But he is a guy that's really good on crossing routes. And, you know, ideally, he would actually be the guy that could overtake Robert Woods as your wide receiver 2 in this setup. Like, I think Wilson coming out of Michigan fits in Arthur Smith offense pretty well based on what he did well in college, running those crossing routes, which is a staple of this passing game. And someone that I think is a willing blocker for a slot wide receiver. So maybe Robert Woods can be a good mentor for him and he can learn some stuff and kind of be some bit of a hybrid of a Randall Cobb, Robert Woodsy type of player. You know, both guys have been in their prime, capable sort of number 2 wide receivers. I think Roman Wilson can get into that mix. It's just year 1 was really concerning. And then you get it into, okay, Ben Skoranek. They bring in Robert Woods because I think Ben Skoranek was so useless as a wide receiver for them that they wanted someone that has at least a little bit more receiving chops. But he still probably makes the team as a special teamer and a blocking specialist. Scotty Miller, you know, deep threat. Brandon Johnson has played a little bit. They might only keep 5 wide receivers here. That wouldn't be a huge surprise. And then you get into the tight ends, which kind of brings us back to the starting player conversation. They really have 2 full-time starters, I think, in Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith. And then with what we said about how much 13 personnel this team is going to run, Darnell Washington himself is going to be in many ways a rotational starter. And I don't know. I don't have too much to add on Pat Freiermuth at this point. I feel like we have a pretty firm understanding of who he is. He, I think, has in many ways become the new kind of poster boy for your good possession Y tight end. I think he's, you know, kind of been the next generation's Hunter Henry. You know, they're like 5 years apart, so it's not a full generation. But yeah, he's a good balanced player, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none at the tight end position. I don't think he's a great blocker, but he's a solid blocker. Not the most dynamic athlete or separator, but he's good enough in that regard. He's got good hands. He's had, you know, he had some drops last year for sure. He had 5 drops. It's not where he's been at on his career. I think he can clean that up. He did catch 86% of his contested catch looks last year. That was crazy. But he's been a 55% guy in his career, so that's very good for a possession tight end. Not necessarily great. Obviously, if he can do what he did last year, that is great. But he's going to be a useful player here. He gives them the balance in this tight end room. He's not the blocker Darnell Washington is, but he's a better receiver. He's not the receiver Jonnu Smith is, but he's a better blocker. So he gives them total flexibility. If they want to run 13 personnel, he can be the middleman there, where Darnell's more of the inline option. If you want to be 12 personnel, you could either go with Darnell and Pat Freiermuth and have Pat Freiermuth do more of the wing stuff, or you can put Pat in line. He has enough size to block defensive ends, even if he's not as good at it. And you can put Jonnu Smith as the wing player, where he's more dynamic. So he is kind of the pivot piece, the linchpin, if you will, for everything they want to do schematically speaking. And then you have Jonnu Smith, who comes in, and fun fact, I'm in a tight end boosted fantasy league where tight ends get 1.5 points per reception. I had both Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith needless to say, somebody's not so happy about this trade for the Steelers because it's going to eat into both of these guys' workloads. If Jonnu wasn't brought in here, I actually think Pat Freiermuth was going to set up for a really nice year this year as the clear-cut number 2 target in this passing game. And Jonnu in Miami did some really good stuff. He's coming off a career year in Miami. So Pittsburgh's getting a very good version of Jonnu Smith. But yeah, these two guys are going to totally eat into each other in terms of targets. I think they both go from guys that were going to be top 12 fantasy football tight ends to now they're probably top 20 and guys that I'm not that fascinated in anymore because they're going to be week to week and inconsistent. But for the Pittsburgh Steelers, from a football perspective, yeah, this is going to work for all of the schematic reasons we detailed. And Jonnu, like I said, coming off a career year, he can pull away from linebackers. He's still one of the more dynamic tight ends after the catch. So if you're just flipping the ball to him on a play action boot in the flat, he can consistently make slot corners miss and fight for tough yardage. And, if you're running that play on a 2nd and 6, you throw it to him at the line of scrimmage, you've got a first down. Like, he can do a lot of good stuff. He won a lot of tough catches last year. He is very much going to be in tandem with Pat Freiermuth, their number 2 receiver. Who's going to be 2A? Who's going to be 2B? It's going to be week to week, but definitely had to put those two guys both up there with the starters because they are going to be, in my opinion, number 2 and number 3 in receiving yards for this team. I would bet Jonnu gets more yards and Pat Freiermuth gets more receptions would be how I would envision this going. But when the Steelers are able to live in the game script that they want, paired with a DK Metcalf, this is a good enough group. If teams are taking away the run game and they have to get into more of a drop back pass situation, that's where the Steelers are going to run into a little bit more trouble, obviously. Let's talk about Darnell Washington while we're going down this path, though. So, there was a lot of hype for Darnell Washington. I think he was like number 30 on the consensus board in that year. I was a little bit lower on him, but I did love Darnell Washington as kind of a day 2 draft pick. They ended up getting him on day 3, fell for, I think, some injury concerns. Those fortunately haven't surfaced in the league. But he's really coming along as a blocker. He very much is an extension of your offensive line. Frankly, at 280 pounds, I mean, you can make a case that Darnell Washington maybe should have just gone all the way and converted to an offensive lineman because he would be a special athlete for an offensive lineman. But for a tight end, even though he ran a good 40 time at his size, like I think he ran a 4.64, he's very stiff. He struggles to accelerate. It hurts his route running. And he's just not an overly practical full-time starting tight end. But for 13 personnel as an extension of your offensive line, he is still someone that once he can build up speed off of play action or, get on crossing routes or dump it off into the flat, like he is still a really tough body to get down after the catch. And he still has enough build-up speed on a straight line route to be a problem. So he's going to be a part of the rotation and, it's going to be fun to watch these 3 guys in tandem together. And then you got Connor Hayward, who would play fullback if they ever wanted a fullback. He hasn't been entirely useless, but kind of a one-dimensional tweener of a H-back type that I still think makes this team for certain packages. Then you got your receiving backs. I fully expect Jaylen Warren will be their 3rd down back. He's just been pretty productive in the receiving game. He's got good hands. He's got good transitions after the catch. He's good enough as a receiving back. Doesn't really move the needle, but doesn't hurt them in that regard either. You also have Kenneth Gainwell. In theory, they could do some fun stuff with him. He still has some juice in the receiving game. Cordero Patterson's around here for now. We'll see if he actually makes this team. He's 34 years old, but obviously a converted wide receiver. Those would be your core targets out of the backfield. I don't think Caleb Johnson in his rookie season is going to get too much work in the receiving game. I don't. But that rounds out your group of weapons. Again, they rank 22nd to 26th with a B- grade. And I think within the confines of the system they want to run, they're going to be efficient. And I think they have everything they need for that sort of heavy personnel, play-action-oriented passing game. But yeah, once they get into drop-back situations, I think it's really going to be mostly like Aaron Rodgers working with DK Metcalf, and they're going to have some success there. But the level of chemistry that those guys are able to establish is going to be paramount for the upside of this passing game. But let's now discuss the backfield. And they made some changes here. Najee is out the door. Successful Steelers career. He now heads to the Chargers. But they replace him with Caleb Johnson in the third round out of Iowa. A lot of expectations for that draft pick. And then, as we mentioned, they brought in Kenneth Gainwell as well. I ended up saying slightly downgraded with this group. I like Najee Harris. I think if Caleb Johnson can become as good as Najee Harris, that's a huge success. I think it's possible. But to expect that from him in his rookie season is a little bit harder. So slightly downgraded, though. I do like the addition of Caleb Johnson here, and I think there are reasonable hopes that this can go quite well. Now, of course, with him coming in as a rookie, and he's not an Ashton Ginty caliber prospect, hence why he went in the third round and not in the top 6 like Ginty did. You know, we ranked the Raiders inside the top 10 of our running back rankings. The Steelers, I think, much more so have to prove that out. But they do rank 20th to 22nd with a backfield that, yes, has Jaylen Warren, but I think the expectation is that Caleb Johnson is going to be the lead back, especially for early down work. And from a scheme fit perspective, this pick made so much sense. Johnson was at his best running wide zone at Iowa, so much so that I was actually critical to a degree on Caleb Johnson, where if he went to a team that wanted to run more inside zone or was more of a shotgun oriented run game, or asked more of a stop-start style running style from their running back, I had some questions about Caleb Johnson. I thought he had poor acceleration, that his agility was below average, but on wide zone runs where he has real home run hitting build-up speed, his running style is actually very similar to Derrick Henry, which obviously Arthur Smith had in Tennessee. He is not Derrick Henry. He's not 250 pounds. Nobody is Derrick Henry, but it's the same idea. In fact, my pro comp on him was Tevin Coleman, who ran a lot of that wide zone build-up speed style run game with the Falcons under Kyle Shanahan back in the day. That's who I see in Caleb Johnson. And I think within the confines of this offense, he every bit will be the lead back. He's going to be very comfortable with those style runs. That's essentially what Iowa did. In fact, Iowa's system was very similar to Arthur Smith's system. So he'll be very familiar there. But yeah, he's going to have some big runs, like especially best ball drafts, underdog fantasy. Caleb's going to have some huge weeks when things work, when he can get into the second level. He has that speed train ability where he'll put a stiff arm on you. He'll run through an arm tackle, undersized DBs, just have a hard time getting this guy down on the ground. So when they can get him into the second level, he's going to be able to make some noise. Might there be some weeks where good run defenses take away those holes, force the Steelers into other running concepts and into the passing game, where I think we will see Caleb come off the field more for third down work? Yeah, Caleb might have some quieter weeks as well, at least within his rookie season. But I am generally speaking optimistic about Caleb Johnson. Dynasty leagues, I have been targeting a lot of Caleb Johnson. But I think, yeah, best ball formats as well, maybe crank him up a round or two as well. But the nice thing about the Steelers is their floor is quite nice. If for some reason Caleb Johnson just doesn't see it or his acceleration is an issue, they can just go to Jaylen Warren for the most part. Now, I don't think Warren is the type of guy that can stay durable for a 250, 300 carry season. And I think Warren can run wide zone, but he's probably better north and south with his shiftiness on inside zone. He has speed, but it's not quite to the degree of like Caleb Johnson's breakaway ability, which is ultimately something you want to look for in your lead back in a wide zone heavy offense. Because the whole idea is to turn that corner, get you into space where you can provide those explosive runs in the run game. But yeah, he's a very good balance back. They're happy to have him. He's very good as a third down option. I think that makes him a brilliant complement to Caleb Johnson. He's got the smooth hands. makes guys miss out in space. He's got more shiftiness than someone like Caleb Johnson has. He's had over 300 yards in each of the last 2 years. You wish he was a better pass blocker. Maybe with Najee gone, Jalen Warren can realize, like, if he can just become a good pass blocker, he can be a really valued asset for this team, because I don't think carving out a RB1 job is really in his future for the Steelers team, and probably not elsewhere either. But long term, like, could this be a really logical 1-2 punch within this system? Yeah, I do think so. But Caleb Johnson does have to come out and prove it, which is why the Steelers do rank 20th to 22nd. But there is a lot of upside for this to be more of a top half group of the league if Caleb is just one of those third round rookies that, pun intended, hits the ground running and is closer to a star back out the gate, which I think he has potential to kind of replace Najee's shoes within his rookie season. We need to see it, right? Behind these guys, Kenneth Gainwell, honestly, considering how good the blocking's been in Philadelphia, he's just been way too inconsistent. But as an RB3, sure. Again, Cordarrelle, I don't know that he'll make the team. We'll see what kind of shape he's in, honestly. He's going to have to earn this roster spot. But they did bring in Trey Sermon, who would give you a little bit more of a size profile. I'm not a big Trey Sermon fan. Evan Hull. Yeah, there's not a whole lot to say, frankly, after Caleb and Jalen Warren, which is fine. And then I didn't mention this earlier, but the Steelers are one of 3 teams who will not be getting any sort of multiplier from the quarterback in the run game. Just no mobility aspect from Rodgers. Even like some quarterbacks in this series will get an ever so slight contribution to the run game because they're at least threats off of like play action boots. Rodgers, his mobility is so shot at this point that a lot of defensive ends will be able to collapse down on the wide zone run game off of those naked play action boot fakes. And a lot of really athletic defensive ends can crash down, take away those cutback lanes for guys like Caleb Johnson. And if the quarterback does keep it, they'll be able to catch up with him pretty quickly. So you don't get that boost that other teams do get, which isn't the end of the world. It's just other teams are getting a numbers advantage that the Steelers do not. But overall, a promising young backfield with the rookie Caleb Johnson that I'm very excited to see. Let's talk about the offensive line. So not very many changes this offseason. They let Dan Moore walk. He gets an absolute bag in free agency by the Titans. That was more, him getting $20 million a year was more of a reflection of the Titans' desperation than it was him being some major loss for the Steelers. They were lucky to have Dan Moore last year because Troy Fautanu, their first-round pick, played week 1 and then missed the rest of the season. They're hoping to get Troy Fautanu back, their first-round pick from last year. And then likewise, James Daniels also got a decent contract with Miami, but he only played 4 games and then left. So compared to last year's season, they're not losing too much at guard and from James Daniels. So I ultimately went with slightly upgraded / to be determined. Dan Moore, he's fine. I think there are very reasonable expectations that Troy Fautanu can at least be fine, but there's very real reasons to believe he can be an upgrade at tackle from Dan Moore. So again, I said slightly upgraded to be determined on the offensive line. But let's go through this group. And it's one of the more fascinating offensive lines in the league, where this is a very young, talented, but unproven offensive line. So for the rankings, that's reflected. They show up 24th for the overall offensive line. But for pass blocking, near the bottom of the league, frankly, 27th to 28th. They have a lot of questions that need to be answered on how well this group can hold up for Aaron Rodgers. But from a run blocking perspective, a little bit better. They rank 19th there, where they do actually get a little bit of a boost from their skill blockers with guys like Robert Woods and Darnell Washington that we talked about. But this group gets the wild card icon for me. This is a group that is going to, in many ways, determine the success of this Steelers team. There is a lot of talent here. 4 young players, all drafted within the last couple of years. 4 players that get the up arrow for me for a Steelers team that has done a very good job coaching up offensive linemen, that I think for a long time has just needed the right combination of upside and youth on the offensive line to get them back to their kind of glory days. Where back in the Killer B days, that was one of the better offensive lines in the league. They've had a fall from grace there for years, and they still have to prove that they can get there. But man, this could be as much as a top 10 offensive line this year if everything can come together. I think they really do have that upside. It's just they are that unproven where they come in more towards the bottom 10 in the league as far as how we rank these guys heading into the season. So let's go from left to right. You got Broderick Jones, who has started at right tackle and been very up and down. A first-round pick in 2023 that wasn't able to fully supplant himself as a starter in that rookie season. Last year he did. And I would say struggled early and settled in much more consistently in the second half of the year from a pass blocking standpoint. And then from a run blocking regard, you see a lot of those athletic flashes. That was less of a question from him at Georgia, but even there, he has yet to fully put the entire package together in terms of being able to play fast and consistently get to the right man. So just a lot of talent, really athletic guy. He's got all the traits there. Year two was better than year one, but you would certainly want to see a bigger leap from year 2 to year 3. And he's also going to be making a transition to what is supposedly, according to the Steelers, his more natural position at left tackle. So maybe that can help. Maybe he is one of these guys that's just much more comfortable on the left side. So maybe there's some extra optimism with that switch. But yeah, it's a big year 3 for Broderick Jones. I would say if he doesn't take a notable step forward, we might be talking about them declining his 5th-year option potentially and like maybe putting a lot of pressure on replacing him. I don't think he was such a disaster last year that you're in panic mode either, but he's got a pretty wide spectrum here. And only time will tell how this goes. But if he is as good as he was last year, yeah, he's going to take his losses and he's going to miss some blocks in the run game, and he's more of just a adequate piece on your offensive line with some athleticism. But then at left guard with Isaac Seumalo, so I mentioned this offensive line gets the wild card icon for me. It's a polarizing group, could go one way or another. 4 pieces here are because they're young and unproven. On the flip side, Isaac Seumalo at his age turns 32 years old this year and did take a dip in pass blocking efficiency last year. Whether or not he continues to regress or if it was more of a random outlier season as opposed to real regression, that's another factor here. Ultimately, I think the most likely situation here is that, yeah, he's 32 years old. He can't quite move as well as he once did. He's going to lose a little bit more than he once did, but he's still, as he was last year, a solid pass blocker and a good run blocker, a just really strong guy, has played over 6,000 snaps in his career. He knows where he's going. He knows who to pick up against stunts and blitzes. Someone that's like just a very solid offensive lineman. And if guys around him develop and Seumalo can settle in as your 3rd or 4th best offensive lineman, whereas right now he projects as probably your 2nd, you're in a really good spot. If he has to be your 2nd best offensive lineman, kind of like he was last year, it's not going to be necessarily ideal. Zach Frazier, I would say, was their best offensive lineman last year. He was a slam dunk pick as a rookie, 2nd-round pick. I was just dead wrong. I just missed on Zach Frazier. I don't have a great reason for it. I overthought some of his losses against the Bull Rush at West Virginia, and I didn't think he was all that athletic. I thought he was going to be a solid center. Not that I thought he was bad or anything. I thought he would be a starter in the league. But his tape in Pittsburgh last year was really fun to watch. I just misevaluated him. I'll hold my hand up. Not that I hated him and it was a disaster, but he just has been better than I thought he would be. Really good core strength. I mean, that comes from the wrestling background, but when he gets his hands inside on you, he's just such a natural blocker, really good instincts, climbing to the 2nd level, finding guys. And he blocked wide zone much better than I expected to. I think, even if he wasn't the best athlete, the core strength does show there. When you block wide zone, you're going to find yourself in a lot of awkward angles at times. And he's just really good at getting in the mud and fighting and scratching and clawing from odd odd body positioning just to have effective blocks. So yeah, he's a really good player. We'll see what the kind of year 2 looks like for him. I think he is well, just like we talked about with Jackson Powers Johnson in our last deep dive with the Raiders, like he could get into that kind of who's the next best center not named Creed Humphrey debate. He's not there yet. He's got to prove it here in year 2. I think from a pass blocking perspective, there's still room to get better. But he was still pretty solid there. So he is their best piece, and you're fully optimistic that you have, in all likelihood, a top 5, worst case top 10 center already here in Zach Frazier. So he's a stud. And then at right guard, Mason McCormick. Him and Broderick Jones are probably your 2 big question marks. I feel much more optimistic about Frazier and Fatanu just because I loved Fatanu as a prospect. And he just missed his rookie season. But yeah, McCormick, a 4th-round pick coming in, was just streaky. But he is nasty. He's got that dickhead mentality you look for. He's got a good first step and, a pretty solid athlete for such a big guy. So for him, it's just continuing to clean up his technique, continuing to get used to that switch from playing at South Dakota State, going against NFL competition. It was to expect him to come in and be a rock solid guard in his rookie season was going to be really a tough ask, but he did start damn near every game and certainly held his own. It's just going to be a matter of establishing that consistency and cleaning things up. So he has absolutely starting guard potential, and that could hit as early as this season here in year 2. And then, Troy Fautanu at right tackle. I'm a huge fan of Troy Fautanu. He just had so much athleticism and technique and toughness. It was just really hard to imagine him failing at the next level. Now that he's sliding to right tackle, it's hard not to see Zach Tom in this player where he doesn't have the longest, although he did actually measure out with longer arms than people expected, but he does have kind of a smaller frame like Zach Tom. Maybe never going to be the most powerful player or an elite tackle, although Zach Tom is pushing that territory. And I think Troy Fautanu just might have that sort of projection in him. There's a lot of Rashawn Slater in his game as well. So I was a huge fan of him when they took him, was surprised he fell to them. It's a bummer that he got hurt. So obviously he's got to stay healthy and prove what he's got at the NFL level, but I'm not really worried about it. We just have to see it. And that rounds out a really fun starting 5. Honestly, I'm excited to see how these guys can grow together and climb in these rankings together. As far as the depth goes, it's NFL depth. They've got a couple guys that have been around here. Calvin Anderson was here last year. He's a decent enough swing tackle. I'm not going to complain about him as a backup tackle. I think that's just fine. Then you got some undrafted types behind that. We'll see who sticks around with that group. On the interior of the offensive line, Spencer Anderson was a 7th-round pick out of Maryland. I think he played a little bit last year and was okay. I think they found a backup guard in the 7th round, as the Steelers are pretty good at finding. So you got a backup guard, you got a backup tackle, and then Ryan McCollum would probably be your backup center as he was last year. More of a concern there. You hope Zach Frazier can stay healthy. Maybe Spencer Anderson can figure out how to play center, or maybe Sayamalu or McCormick could do it. Maybe get some flexibility there. But yeah, Max Sharping, Nick Broker, not a whole lot to speak on there, to be honest. So you got a backup tackle, you got one backup interior player there in Spencer Anderson. If you suffer more than one injury, you would run into more trouble, which is normal for, I think, just about every offensive line in the league. But that does conclude our offensive breakdown for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And as we head into this upcoming season, the Steelers do have a lot to prove on this side of the ball. I have them as our 25th ranked offense as we're ranking these teams, near their floor as we head into the season. 26th in passing game, 20th in run game. You look especially at the offensive line and the young running back and Caleb Johnson coming in, a lot to prove. I do think this team, if those 2 areas specifically can go right, this can be more of a 15th, 16th ranked offense, which, not to spoil the whole defensive breakdown here, but we know this Steelers team can play some defense. That's going to be your formula for this team to be, the best version of themselves, which I'm not going to sit here and sell Super Bowl upside on this Steelers team with this offense, but can they actually get into the playoffs and maybe win a playoff game this year? Maybe two if they get lucky. Yeah, best case scenario, if this can be like a top 10 offensive line and Caleb Johnson is a superstar and Rodgers can be, not his old self, but maybe even a little bit better than I have him ranking. We ranked them 21st at QB. Can Rodgers be the 16th best quarterback? Yeah, that could maybe lead to a feel-good version of this Steelers team. But that is all definitely going to be contingent on this Steelers defense reaching their upside as well. So let's now transition to the Steelers defense. And we'll begin here by taking a look at their offseason changes along the defensive line here. And the Steelers doing what they like to do, keeping the pipeline going for this D-line, but in a big way this time around as they spend their first-round pick on Derek Harmon out of Oregon. So a big addition there. They do lose Larry Ogunjobi, who played about half of their snaps last year and continued to be a nice part of that rotation. So those are the kind of core changes here. But some other moves too. They do lose Montravius Adams, who again has been a minor part of that rotation, was better in 2023 than he was last season. So they're going to let him go. They spent a 5th round pick on the very large Yaya Black out of Iowa. The Steelers do love themselves some Iowa Hawkeyes where they hardly have to change their jersey colors. I think they added 3 or 4 Hawkeyes to this year's team. And then Daniel Ekwale as well, who ate up a bunch of snaps in New England last year, is going to be competing for a roster spot, but not a bad little piece to put into the mix here. So I said hopefully upgraded on the interior of the defensive line. I think there are very real reasons to believe that Derek Harmon can give them more than what they got from Larry Ogunjobi, specifically being the core change there. And then on the edge, I just said neutral. They bring in Preston Smith midseason. He played kind of a rotational role for them, ended up only playing 14% of their final snaps. And they do bring in Jack Sawyer in the 4th round. Getting younger with that kind of rotational edge spot. I certainly was lower on Sawyer. I don't really see him as a long-term starter for this team, but can he be a younger, cheaper version of what they had in Preston Smith for the second half of the season? Yes, absolutely. You could argue slightly upgraded, but I'm not high enough on Sawyer to go that far. I think it was a nice enough draft pick that leaves the change at edge as neutral. But let's dive into this defensive line. And as I say all the time, I'm ranking these units and these teams at or near their floor. And for the Pittsburgh Steelers, this defensive line is such a core part of what they are all about. And ranking the Steelers defensive line at or near their floor, they still rank inside the top 4 for my final pass rush rankings, 2nd to 4th for overall pass rush, a little bit lower for D-line run defense, but still inside the top 10, 6th to 10th there. And overall, the Steelers defensive line comes in as my 3rd overall defensive line. But what's crazy is, like I said, that is closer to their floor. If your floor is the 3rd best defensive line in the league, that's insane. There are aspects of this D-line that can absolutely have the arrow pointing up and leave this as the best defensive line in the NFL this season if a few things go right, and really set this defense over the edge to get them beyond kind of the point where they've been over the last few years, where this has been a good D-line and this defense has been kind of 5th to 10th on a year-to-year basis. This is the most talented collection of players that they've had on this defensive line. I think it's the deepest collection of talent that they've had in a long, long time, if maybe ever. And yeah, like I said, if a few things go right here, this could be a game-changing defensive line that maybe does see this Steelers defense reach new heights that could inevitably lead to them maybe being more of a legitimate championship contender overall. So I do think we have to start with TJ Watt, who frankly is one of those sort of wild card pivot points for that discussion we just had. We know TJ Watt's a really freaking good player, but he is coming off a down year last year, and a year where he wasn't good old TJ Watt, that transformative elite pass rushing presence. He is now on the other side of 30 years old. It is very much possible that what we saw last year was age regression for a player that has always one at the core of what he does with his bend and get off and athletic twitch, on top of, yes, some power and excellent technique. But it is possible that we saw some physical regression, and the Steelers are betting against that. The Steelers came out in good timing here. It's kind of funny. The opposite ends of the Jalen Ramsey trade have worked out for me timing wise, because they traded Jalen Ramsey the day after I dropped the Dolphins deep dive. That sucked. Well, the Steelers went ahead and made that trade before their deep dive here and granted me the TJ Watt extension to talk about here in this deep dive. But obviously the Steelers making TJ Watt the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL for the next 3 seasons is a big deal. And they are betting against regression on TJ Watt, because I do think we did see a lesser version of TJ Watt last year, a version that would not be worth $41 million. Still a really nice player and someone that would be worth, $20, $25 million. Like, still probably a high end too, if you want to really look at his production in the most down year he's had in a long, long time, if we're being realistic about that. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that is just who he is now, and the Steelers, like I said, are not saying that's who he is now. But Steelers fans will come out and say, well, yeah, obviously he didn't play as well. He got hurt around week 14, and that's where, at the end of the season, he frankly disappeared. You couldn't find TJ Watt with a pair of binoculars in terms of making impacts in games for the final month of the season. And that's fair. But Steelers fans, I will give you this. TJ Watt wasn't his good old self well before that. Weeks 1 through 14, before that ankle injury that everybody wants to point to, he was 46th in the NFL in pass rush win rate. He was 24th in the NFL in pressures. I had already had conversations on my podcast, which I do have a podcast, the Fully Inflated Football Podcast, if you want to check it out. But I had already had conversations before the ankle injury about he had been quiet and was starting to feel his age a little bit more. And those numbers do back it up. So yeah, he is kind of the ultimate wild card for this defense and this team this year after they just gave him that massive contract. I mean, if he is what he was last year, that's a massive overpay. They're basically paying an extra quarterback here. Now, yeah, they can get away with it a little bit more because Rodgers is playing for basically nothing. They're going to have presumably a rookie quarterback contract after this. They can kind of sell it to themselves a little bit better, but that's still, you still want to properly utilize your resources, and that could be 2 or 3 other players that you could pay with the surplus money that TJ Watt is potentially going to be overpaid here. Or what we saw last year was just a down year. Turns out he is a freak athlete, and he's poised for another 2 or 3 run of being an elite difference-making defensive player of the year candidate. And frankly, I questioned the Steelers last year when they extended Cam Hayward at 35 years old after multiple years of regression, and they look like geniuses for the contract they gave Cam Hayward. So the Steelers have earned a little bit of benefit of the doubt here, and I don't want to keep this all negative, but there are very real signs that point to regression from TJ Watt. So a tough player to rank as we head into his age 31 season, coming off the least productive year he's had in a long, long time. For the sake of the series, he gets a 90 overall rating, still in that superstar category for me, but not quite in that elite top tier of edge rushers, at least for how we're ranking him right now. Again, closer to the floor in the idea that he isn't quite what he used to be, but I do put that up and down yellow arrow on him as well, where, yeah, there is a world where he gets back to being one of the 2 or 3 best defensive players in the entire NFL, and that would go a long way towards everything we said about maybe this defensive line helping this defense take that real step into being an elite championship caliber defense. The last thing I'll say on TJ Watt is, despite some of the drop-off in the pass rush production last year, he is still every bit an elite run defending edge. I think short of Max Crosby, I would say TJ Watt is the second best run defending edge, and even then you're splitting hairs. I think TJ Watt has even more kind of playmaking gut feel about him, whereas Max Crosby, in terms of his ability to truly set a hard edge and dictate the line of scrimmage with a little bit more size, would probably get a little bit more nod in the traditional sense of defending the run, but he is absolutely going to contribute to the run defense as well. But surely Steelers fans will have a rational and kind response to my take there on TJ Watt. But one way or another, you do expect that TJ Watt is going to be an impact player off the edge for this team. That much is fair. It's just whether he's going to be like a 55 pressure, 10 or so sack player as kind of a really high-end number 2 caliber rusher as he was last year, or if he can get back to being damn near double that, which he was in his prime, 80 pressure, up to 20 sack seasons. We'll see. Obviously, it'd be great for the Steelers and their fans if he could get back to that level. But the beauty here is they don't need him necessarily to become his elite old self. This can still become the best defensive line in the league if TJ Watt just is what he was last year. They have other avenues for that to happen, mostly with their interior defensive linemen. But I do want to actually talk about Alex Highsmith next and kind of keep things with the edge, and then we'll work our way inside. Look, Alex Highsmith, I think you can make a damn strong argument that on a efficiency basis was the better edge rusher in Pittsburgh last year. It's just he did miss some time, so the final numbers didn't look quite that way. But, I mean, again, from an efficiency standpoint, Alex Highsmith had 54 pressures on 323 pass rush snaps. That's, I mean, I'm not going to go ahead and calculate that, but it's what, 16, 17% pressure rate, right? That's insane. TJ Watt was actually below that 10% threshold in terms of pressure rate. He had 57 pressures, so just 3 more than Highsmith had on damn near double the amount of pass rush snaps, 599 to Highsmith's 323. So Highsmith was a true game changer last year. It's just a bummer that he missed the 5 games that he did. And honestly, you could argue that the up arrow should even be on him as well. I'm not going to sit here and argue against the idea that Highsmith might even have another step in him. In fact, if he just played at the level he did in 12 games last year for 17 games, maybe I would put him into that kind of true number 1 superstar edge rush tier. I have him just sniffing that in this series. The 85 rating is the stud tier. The 86 rating is a superstar rating for these edge rushers. So he's just sniffing it. Maybe he can get there. I didn't necessarily put the up arrow on him, but you could argue for it. Either way, Alex Highsmith has absolutely learned from TJ Watt. He kind of came in as a quote-unquote poor man's TJ Watt, and he's much closer to just being, you know, not peak TJ Watt, but what TJ Watt is today as a smaller but hyper twitched up edge rusher that can win in so many different ways. I think you could argue Highsmith actually has an even better bull rush. He doesn't quite have the legendary cross chop, dip, and rip move that TJ Watt has, but he's got a little bit of a power element to his game. Just like TJ Watt, he's excellent against the run, and Highsmith has that signature inside spin move that is one of the prettiest looking spin moves when he hits it in the league. So I'm a huge fan of Alex Highsmith, and again, I left the up arrow off him, but there's a world where you're talking about having 2 true number 1 edge rushers here with these 2 guys. And really the worst case scenario is you have 2 really good number 2s in what TJ Watt was last year and what we're kind of projecting Alex Highsmith as here. So that's a really awesome starting point. This is every bit in the conversation for the best edge duos in the league. And then also, like, we got to throw Nick Herbig in there as well. He was just kind of a very similar prospect to Alex Highsmith. He just was a undersized edge linebacker that comes in the mid rounds. Highsmith was a 3rd round pick. I want to say Herbig was a 4th round pick, and Herbig hasn't quite gotten all that playing time, and he has not been able to show the early down contributions as a run defender that, say, Highsmith and TJ Watt are so good at. But in terms of pass rushing efficiency, he's got it, dude. I mean, he had just 227 pass rush snaps last year. He had 27 pressures and 7 sacks. That's insane. And he has some combination of both TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith's skill set with an elite first step, excellent bend to dip and rip around the corner. And he maybe is just scratching the surface himself. And he's kind of in part like a little bit of the reason I was kind of taken aback by the TJ Watt contract. I know TJ Watt wanted his money and you want to keep your franchise legend healthy, but I didn't hate the idea if Pittsburgh could have pulled it off to kind of play hardball with TJ Watt and say, hey, you did show some regression last year. Prove to us that that's not who you are now. Because if if Watt did take a step back, again, at 31 years old, I think there's a world where Alex Highsmith and Nick Herbig can be a very capable edge duo of the future for the Steelers team. We're not going to be able to probably see that vision played out with Nick Herbig. He might be turning into more of an interesting free agent in a couple of years that's just frankly one of the best edge threes off the bench. But as far as we're talking about this Steelers team, to have a guy that maybe is coming into his prime and in a different situation maybe would be emerging, kind of like we talked about maybe Malcolm Kuntz for the Raiders last year, who has more of a runway to be an impact edge rusher. The fact that that's your guy off the bench if you have injuries, or if someone does get tired. Again, there's just only so many opportunities for him to get playing time because Highsmith and Watt are guys you want there off the edge on third downs, and Herbig is not a great early downs player. But what a luxury to have a Nick Herbig here. And then just keeping things in this edge group, wrapping this up real quick. You got Jack Sawyer, 4th round pick. Got a lot of buzz playing at Ohio State on that national championship team. He has the kind of unblocked strip sack on Quinn Ewers in that Texas game. He had a folklore about him, but in terms of his NFL prospects, I think late 3rd, early 4th was kind of his correct range, where I see a guy that is a crafty run defender. He's got good feet. He is just really good with his hands in general, but doesn't really have any ways that you project him to win as a pass rusher from a physical skill set perspective. Doesn't really have a great first step. He's got okay bend. Doesn't have a lot of, a big bag of pass rush moves. Doesn't really have power, you need something to kind of build off of, and he doesn't really have anything other than just being good with his hands and kind of winning with effort. So that kind of, to me, left him as more of a edge 3 type, which to me is more of, a late 3rd, early 4th round pick. But considering Nick Herbig doesn't play the run well, they wanted Preston Smith in this role last year. I think Jack Sawyer plugs right in there and can be a really nice kind of edge 3.5 for this team. And then beyond that, it's, you don't need too much from these guys. Jeremiah Moon has played a decent bit. Eku Leota has been in the league a couple years now. He was kind of a thumper coming out of college. We'll see if those guys make the team. But yeah, obviously this is one of the best and deepest edge groups in the entire league. That is a big part of the defensive line overall, ranking 3rd. But that's not where you stop. I mean, we have 3 really interesting potential impact players on this defensive line for this upcoming season, but each of these pieces have some question marks about them to an extent. You feel really good about the general floor of what you're getting from this group, but question marks in the sense of can these guys all reach a best case scenario, in which case you would have one of the best interior defensive lines in the league to complement one of the best edge groups in the league as well. So you start with Cam Hayward. And full stop, I could not have been any more wrong about what Cam Hayward was going to be for the Steelers in 2024. I saw a player at 34, 35 years old whose production had dipped off. And, I guess I'll apologize for saying that I thought the 35-year-old was just not what he used to be. And then he comes out and really has a career year. 60 pressures, 10 sacks, continue to be a dominant force against the run as that sort of 4-eye base end that they like to use him as. He's not a full-on, 2-gapping nose tackle in that sense, though for his size, he can do that stuff better than you would expect. They don't ask him to do that a ton. They ask Keanu Benton to do that much more. Whether you agree with them doing that or not is a different conversation. But yeah, dude, Cam Hayward just kind of was an ageless wonder last year. But the fact is he turns 36 now this year. Can he repeat being one of the 4 or 5 best interior defensive linemen in the league as he was last year? Needless to say, that's got to be a question mark. I'm not projecting regression. I'm fully expecting that he kind of will be what he was last year, but you could see that, time, father time catches up with everybody here. So that is, for what it's worth, a question, but he's still fantastic. And then Keanu Benton, heading into year 3 now, he is fascinating because he was basically the same player in year 2 that he was in year 1, which isn't a problem necessarily. He was really exciting in year 1, but, I kind of hinted at it. He's someone that they asked to play a lot of nose tackle, and he's just not great at it. He's not the biggest guy. He doesn't necessarily have the size for it. He's a little bit taller. He can let run blockers get up and under his pads. And I think he is probably the biggest detractor from the overall run defense. They still rank top 10, but it was a B grade for the D-line run defense. Can he get better at that role in year 3? That's a big thing to look for. And then on top of that, honestly, like his ability as a pass rusher, when he wins, it is dynamite. He has a variety of quick hitting pass rush moves. He has really a good get off and the ability to cross your face. He's got a swim move. He can rip past you. I've seen him win with cross chops before. Like, he has dynamic pass rushing ability, but you look back on the season and it was 23 pressures and 2 sacks on the year, playing even a little bit more than he did in his rookie season. And in his rookie season, 24 pressures and a sack. He's got it in there, but it's, if you really just look down the board, man, it's like, for the most part, 1 pressure per game. And you just want more than that from him. I know that he's capable of it, but it's time. Like, can we get this unlocked here? I would love to see it. And maybe another piece in this D-line with a little bit more pass rushing focus, like a Derek Harmon compared to a Larry Ogunjobi. Maybe he does draw a little bit less attention on these double teams and they're able to isolate him to win in the way that he can more often. But I do still put the up arrow on Keanu Benton. But if it doesn't happen this year, I think we can kind of say we know mostly what he is, where he's more of just this enticing splash player who's potentially being asked to play out of role a little bit. I still disagree that the Steelers should be using him as a nose tackle, but I don't think that's going to change as we talk about Derek Harmon here, because Harmon very much is going to replace those Larry Ogunjobi snaps as more of that penetrating 3 technique role. And Harmon is even smaller than Keanu Benton is. In fact, Harmon size-wise is not too far off of Cam Hayward, and I think they view Harmon as the long-term Cam Hayward replacement on this defensive line. But for now, the fact that they have 2 guys in that profile is pretty freaking insane. But a really good draft pick to bring in Derek Harmon. I'm glad they went this route. There was a lot of talk about Shedeur Sanders potentially, or even like going like a Marion Hampton, who would have come off the board. No, he would have been there, but like to get Caleb Johnson, who's a perfect scheme fit instead in the 3rd round, instead of going with an Marion Hampton, who was another common mock draft pick, and then grab a Derek Harmon, a legit 1st round D-line prospect, where certainly in time you're going to need to replace Cam Hayward. He can't play forever, I don't think. But yeah, really nice draft pick. He's a true do-it-all 3 technique along the defensive line, or a 4-eye or a base end. They're going to be able to kind of move him between the outside of the guard and the kind of head up on the tackle, depending on the formation they want to play. But yeah, really athletic dude, really good balance, athletically speaking. Like, he tested well in terms of the athleticism, but you also talk about like contact balance for defensive linemen is really important in the same sense we talk about it with running backs, where you are going to get bumped and smashed in odd angles from 300-pound offensive linemen. So to be able to kind of absorb it, whether it's in your chest or in your hips, or even against like cut blocks when people go down low on you, to have that athletic balance is really important too. And he's got that. He wins with a bunch of different rush moves. And the fact that he does have a bull rush, I think, is everything for Derek Harmon, because he will cross your face. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for him to develop more of a pass rushing bag, so to speak. But he is really good with his hands on swipes and that kind of stuff. But if he can develop a cross chop, for example, like, that's in there for him to really terrorize offensive linemen. And he's got some great mentors. I mean, TJ Watt is probably the best cross chop artist in the NFL. So that's one move like that could really take his game to the next level. But I think because of some of that balance we talked about, with his athletic profile, he's good against the run as well. There's room to improve there. But yeah, you're very optimistic for Derek Harmon. My pro comp on him was Christian Barmore at the end of the day. Barmore's had some health issues in recent seasons, but he's kind of a number 1 defensive tackle when Barmore's been fully healthy. So if they can locate that in Derek Harmon, hell yeah. And if that can happen this year, double hell yeah. So you can really see the upside with this defensive line. There's a world where obviously this is the best overall defensive line, but this could damn well even be the best interior D-line and the best edge duo. And if that happens, and even the best edge 3 in the league on top of that with Nick Herbig maybe, if that all happens, like, yeah, there's going to be some times where it doesn't even matter how Aaron Rodgers plays. And this could feel, I mean, just drawing some parallels with like Peyton Manning and those Denver Broncos defenses when Peyton won his second Super Bowl. Like, if it's going to happen, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if it's going to happen, I think it's hitting all of these green lights on the defensive line, this being the best defensive line we've maybe ever seen in Pittsburgh, and this maybe becoming the best defense in the league. But let's rip through the D-line depth. All these guys are going to play. I think they're going to carry a lot of these guys on the roster. And, you know, these guys are going to have to scratch and claw to make the team. So you got Isaiah Loudermilk has been kind of the hybrid end backup to Cam Hayward that they like. He's done a good enough job in that role. Not really much to say about that, but he'll play some base defensive end on early downs. They bring in Yahya Black. This one does fascinate me because, like I said, I just don't think Keanu Benton is a nose tackle at his heart of hearts. Well, Yahya Black is a nose tackle. I don't know that he's ready to play it in the NFL right away. He just has got to get better with his pad level. But size-wise, coming out of Iowa, 5th-round pick, maybe you could get some good coaching into him quickly and, improve your overall run defense by not having to force Keanu Benton to do that. And then maybe Keanu Benton can be a little bit more fresh to get after the quarterback on passing down. So I'm at least fascinated there, but I'm not a huge fan of Yahya Black's tape at the end of the day. And it's not like he wasn't getting great coaching at Iowa either. So we'll see where that goes. Dean Lowry was brought in last year as well. He's a pass rushing backup defensive end. He will play in emergency situations if he makes this team. Logan Lee was very much in Dean Lowry's player archetype. I'd be interested to see what year 2 of development can look like for him. Athletic guy. Loudermilk, Lowry, Logan Lee, and even DeMarvin Leal, all kind of that hybrid and role. So you're probably not going to keep all these guys, but I like that you've got competition for all those dudes. And then Daniel Ekwale, I bet makes this team. He put on some pretty decent tape for New England last year as an early down run defender. And, I think he's a frisky player. So I wouldn't be surprised if they look at him as the best run defender off the bench for them, in which case he would make the team. And then there's even some other guys scratching and clawing for roster spots here too, but pretty deep group at that point. So yeah, this defensive line is freaking awesome, man. I'm not going to spoil it quite yet, but the Steelers' overall defense does come in quite high here. And the D-line here is the biggest reason for that, obviously. But let's keep moving forward into the second level with these linebackers. I just saw today that Patrick Queen made the NFL Top 100 list. So me basically coming out and saying that he's just an average player here in this portion of the video. Probably going to get some hate from Steelers fans. He has immediately become quite overrated with that placement. I disagree firmly with that. But before we get into that, let's talk about the offseason changes for this group. They do let Landon Roberts go, who played a pretty core role for this team last year, basically allowing Peyton Wilson to do what he does as a coverage player without seeing the downside of that rookie in run defense. Landon Roberts was full stop, I would say, a top 10 run defending linebacker for this Steelers team last season. He would come off the field on passing downs. So they're losing that piece. Now, they got some cheaper insurance there in Malik Harrison coming over from Baltimore. There's a world where Malik Harrison could play that early down rotational run defense role for them, but not as proven in that role as what Landon Roberts did for them last year. So I do say slightly downgraded, but I'm not really worried about it as we come back to this group here. I think with Peyton Wilson in year 2, he is now going to have an opportunity to show that he can be more of a 3-down linebacker. And if he can't, then yeah, we'll get into more of that rotation with Malik Harrison playing the Landon Roberts role. But that setup does give them a decent floor, just like we saw last year. Yeah, Roberts couldn't cover and Peyton Wilson couldn't defend the run, but by being smart about playing it LB by committee and rotating that LB2 spot, they worked around it just fine. So because of how they played it last year and with those bodies in there, at no point am I going to be worried about the Steelers linebacker room. But they don't rank terribly high right now. They rank as my 24th overall linebacker room. They are inside the top half for linebacker coverage. I'll give them that. 9th to 14th in that regard. The combination of Patrick Queen and Peyton Wilson could even be a special group in terms of coverage from the middle of the field. But the linebacker run defense grade is quite lower. They do come in 27th to 28th, despite what we said about Malik Harrison potentially being able to help them out in terms of run defense. But let's circle back to Patrick Queen, who I already kind of poked some fun at. You know, he's not a top 75 player in the NFL. He's makes that top 100 list. He's probably not in the top 200 or top 250, frankly. He's an okay average linebacker, better in coverage than he is in run defense. And he is just an aggressive, heat-seeking missile without a targeting system. So, yeah, when you have an athletic former first-round pick that played at LSU, whose highlight reel is going to be a lot of fun because he can absolutely detonate you with the hit stick. He can make some splash plays in coverage when he does guess correctly. But the down-to-down product from him is wildly inconsistent. He consistently finds himself out of position. He is undersized as well, so he struggles to take on blocks, and because of that, he kind of dodges blocks and again will find himself out of position a lot of times because of that. So that's where he is more of a below average run defender among NFL starters, which just isn't great as your LB1. You know, when he was able to be the second linebacker in Baltimore, that was when he got to play his quote unquote best football, because they really they were really able to just let him loose. Roquan could really do all the hard stuff and Patrick Queen could just play C-ball, get ball. Baltimore obviously decides that that's not worth $13 million a year. They let him go. Pittsburgh does bring him in. And at the time, that contract didn't seem terrible because I felt like the linebacker market was about to spike. I still think it's going to spike, but now a year later, that is still one of the highest paid linebackers in the league. And that has come as a bit of a surprise, I think. But, I wouldn't say he's worth $13 million a year. And this year, he actually climbs up to being a $17 million cap hit and next year as well. So he is quite expensive here. More than I'd like to pay a guy that has as many bad plays as Patrick Queen does. But he still will have good games in coverage. It's just very week to week. Very polarizing in that sense. And then, yeah, you like his energy around the line of scrimmage. He is a psychopath at times, and I think that leads to him not being a complete and utter liability against the run as well, despite some of those deficiencies we've said. So, yeah, I think Patrick Queen is probably one of the 30 best linebackers in the NFL, just as, unfortunately, anytime a guy becomes so highly paid and now is discussed as a top 75 player in the NFL, in accordance to that horrible list that I do want to make a video about very soon, by the way, reacting to that list once it's all final. The narrative does change, unfortunately, but that's where I'm at on Patrick Queen. Honestly, Peyton Wilson is who I'm way more excited to see this year in year two. I just love how the Steelers played this in year one, because coming out of NC State, Peyton Wilson was absurdly athletic, moves so well in coverage. He's got the reach. He's, about 6'4". And when NC State did drop him into coverage, it looked like he really had a feel for, route development and zone IQ and all that stuff. But the thing was, NC State used him really off the edge a bunch, like over half his snaps, if I recall correctly. So for a guy that does have a bit of a thinner frame, I was really worried about how he was going to defend the run coming out the gate. This was a pretty hyped up draft prospect that ended up going closer to where I perceived his value, but even a little bit later. I think I had him as a late second, early third round kind of guy, and he ends up going in the third round to the Steelers. But now heading into year two, I would love to see him bulk up a little bit, and Steelers fans, I would love to hear from you guys if there are reports that maybe he is adding 5-10 pounds of functional muscle, because I felt like he needs a little bit more to take on blocks and be more of a full-time linebacker. But now I think an opportunity at least to be more of a full-time starter for this team. I love how they rotated him off the field on early downs and put him out there to just do what he does well and run around and make plays in coverage. I mean, he had a pick covering Justice Hill on a wheel route in that Ravens game that was crazy. I mean, a little bit of luck that he was able to kind of reel that ball in, but just lockdown coverage against a really fast running back like that. And one of the hardest routes to defend in the league is an athletic running back running a wheel route out of the backfield. He played that perfectly. So like, it's all in there. And it wasn't just that play. Like, he was really good in coverage all year long, being able to just kind of focus on that. But he's going to potentially have a lot more on his plate, or maybe they will just continue to go with this rotation and put Malik Harrison in there. But I do think the upside is there for Peyton Wilson to become more of a LB1, a 3-down player. And the sky is the limit for this guy. His physical tools are insane, and he has the length to fill out a little bit more. So I'm really excited for him. And if he can take that leap, this would be more of a difference-making group of linebackers, frankly, because, like I said, if Patrick Queen can be an LB2, you love that. Him having to be an LB1 is a different conversation. But yeah, as far as the depth goes, we've kind of mentioned it with Malik Harrison as kind of that thumper guy that they're bringing in. I agree with the addition. I think he can do a lot of the stuff Landon Roberts has done. He just doesn't have the time on task and the sample size to prove that he's as good as a Landon Roberts, but more in that role versus in Baltimore, where they've kind of bounced him in and out of an edge role as kind of an early down edge player where he's really good at getting off of blocks. But he was a fascinating linebacker prospect coming out. I do like these sort of post-rookie contract linebacker signing in general. These are the types of players that a lot of these guys do figure out year 5, year 6, and become really nice players. So there's a world where Malik Harrison could be a breakout player for this team too, but the path for that is much more limited with Queen and Wilson ahead of him. Cole Holcomb, you have to at least mention him. He's a very good, very balanced, smart linebacker if he could ever stay on the field. Unfortunately, that just, that has not been the case for him in his entire NFL career. But if he's healthy and available for a week when you maybe Queen or Wilson miss a week, if Holcomb's healthy, that's a great backup to be able to step in until he probably gets hurt again. Sad but true. Mark Robinson's played a little bit. He's an okay run defender, I think, for what he is as a LB5 in this group. And then they did draft Carson Bruner in the 7th round. I didn't get around to Carson Bruner's tape, but a decent tester out of Washington will probably make the team as a special teamer, and we'll see what he can be in time. So yeah, there's your group of linebackers. A lot of potential there, especially with Peyton Wilson. It's not a bad group. It's not going to destroy this group, though. From a run defense perspective, there's just a lot of better tandems in the league that are able to get off blocks and get to the run than the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, the Steelers were still 13th, I think, in overall defensive DVOA against the run last year. Having a Patrick Queen in there, and even at times, Peyton Wilson did get some run defense snaps. Like, yeah, there are drawbacks to this group in that phase of the position. But from a coverage angle, really no complaints, and the arrow could be absolutely pointing up as well, where Peyton Wilson has the potential to be one of the best cover linebackers in the entire league. But let's talk about this very new look secondary. This is where things start to get pretty damn exciting, because we hyped up the defensive line in a way where they might have the best defensive line in this era of Steelers football. But at the same time, their secondaries have been really mediocre for multiple years now. Feels like 3, 4, 5 years. The Steelers secondary has just been nothing to really write home about. And I think there's a chance for this to actually be a top 10 difference-making secondary for the Steelers. There are some question marks here. But again, I think this is the best and deepest group they've had in a long time, especially at cornerback. We do need to review the moves they did make here, a lot of them here. So at cornerback, I do say this group, obviously based on what I just said, massively upgraded. They do lose Dante Jackson, who played 3/4 of games last year, was okay-ish. Also Cameron Sutton, no longer the player he used to be, plus some added off-field drama compared to earlier in his career. So nothing major in terms of losses, but with the additions, they get Jalen Ramsey in the trade. I already mentioned I love the trade for them. We'll continue to glaze this move in just a second. They add Darius Slay from Philadelphia. Even before they added Jalen Ramsey, they added Brandon Echols into the mix here, and a 7th-round pick in Dante Kent. So just major additions to the cornerback, one of the more upgraded units in the entire league, in my opinion. Now, the addition of Jalen Ramsey did come at the added cost of trading away Minkah Fitzpatrick. I don't think he is the player that a lot of fans think he is at this stage in his career, or at least the impact he's given this team the last 2 years. He hasn't really been that top 10 safety that he once was. But still a loss, nonetheless. And he played 99% of their snaps last year. They also lose DeMonte Casey, who played a rotational dime back role for them. The only additions are Juan Thornhill, at this point a journeyman veteran, and Sebastian Castro, a UDFA addition that I am excited about, but it is a UDFA addition. So while they got massive upgrades in the cornerback room, and I'm optimistic for this secondary, as we'll continue to talk about, they did get downgraded in the safety room, but I would rather be better at corner than at safety. And let's get into it and talk about this cornerback room. I'll start with Jalen Ramsey because this is the big addition here. And, I think people acted like the Dolphins won that trade. For some reason, people continue to think that Minkah Fitzpatrick is like a top 5 to 10 safety, whereas the tape and the production the last 2 years would tell you otherwise. And then people like to act like Jalen Ramsey is washed, whereas again, the tape definitely tells you a different story there. I mean, is Jalen Ramsey what he was in his prime? No, but I don't think he's that far off of it either. I still see a guy that has plenty of speed to prevent getting stacked over the top. He is still, I think, the best run defending cornerback in the NFL. He has probably, he's at worst top 3 in terms of zone IQ and top 5 in terms of ball skills. This is still a top 10 cornerback in the NFL. So to flip a top 15 safety really is what Minkah's been the last 2 years for a top 10 corner and a upgrade at tight end. I think that's a win for the Steelers. And frankly, you could argue that Jalen Ramsey has more long-term sustainability for this team if he is to earn a contract extension than even Minkah Fitzpatrick, whereas Minkah has already shown a regression at safety at 28, 29 years old. I think Jalen Ramsey at this stage in his career is 2 years older, but comparable in terms of athleticism to a younger Minkah Fitzpatrick. I think Jalen Ramsey has a clear path to switch back to safety at some point. And even within this season, I think we might see Jalen Ramsey play some safety. So let's get into that and like his usage, because I think it's going to be very fascinating here. And I think they have a really exciting vision here. This is a bit of a projection in terms of my conversation with how he's going to get used, but I've got a pretty strong feeling that this is going to be how it goes. I really think they look at how Brian Branch was used in Detroit last year, who in his rookie season was a slot corner. And then in his second season, Brian Branch played a lot more safety on early downs. Detroit runs more base 3-4 and 4-3 defense with 4 defensive backs on the field than anybody in the entire league. Like 40% they come out in base. So in those looks, they made Brian Branch their safety, because otherwise you're taking your nickel corner off the field. So it's really treating that kind of apex defender, that star role, which is the Nick Saban title for basically his slot cornerback, and treating that position as your starting nickel and your starting strong safety in base personnel. I firmly believe that is how they're going to use Jalen Ramsey, and that is when he's played his best football outside of like early in his career in Jacksonville, where he was the best outside corner in the league. When he went to the Rams, that was the other highlight of his career, was being that apex star role defender. I think Pittsburgh is going to plug Jalen Ramsey right into that role, where he immediately becomes one of the best slot corners in the NFL. And in what will, we mentioned it off the bat, they played base defense about 25% of the time last year. That was top 10 in terms of base defense rates in the league last year. There's going to be about 25 to even maybe a little bit more of that now that they have a Jalen Ramsey, up to like 30% of their snaps. Jalen Ramsey will be in many ways their strong safety. Not so much rotating and playing a deep free safety. We'll probably see that from time to time if you get pre-snap motion that kind of forces the Steelers to rotate and adjust that way. I think Jalen Ramsey can do that, absolutely. I think going back to Florida State even, he played some safety. So I definitely think this sets up really nicely for him to maybe get a new contract, go into age 32, 33, kind of like Devin McCourty did later in his career, and have an extended time here as a superstar defender for this Steelers team. But at least for this year, I think people are overreacting to the idea that Jalen Ramsey has regressed to any sizable degree. Yeah, he's a little bit older, not quite as twitchy as he once was, where he was once one of the freakiest athletes in the entire league. But you come down from that a little bit, and he's still an above-average athlete, especially at his size for the cornerback position. So I'm really not worried about it. I think this is a great addition to this secondary. And he's a big boost to their run support as well. They were actually just kind of below average in terms of the DB run support. They had a C grade. They were in that third tier where they're not really getting any help from their defensive backs against the run. Yeah, Deshaun Elliott's pretty good at it. But Beanie Bishop was okay in the slot last year, but not an impact in terms of the run defense. Struggled to take on blocks and tackle consistently. You can't get a bigger upgrade than Jalen Ramsey there. So they jump up into the top tier now with him as your best run defending defensive back. And then Deshaun Elliott, who is a very good run defender from the back end as well to clean stuff up. But I think I am higher on this addition than a lot of people, and I'm excited to see him in this defense. But again, he is kind of your slot apex defender in this defense. That's how I'm kind of treating him, as a slot corner / DB. He can, of course, step out and play outside corner if you have injuries or need to do that, but I do not think that is their plan. So let's talk about their starting outside corners. Joey Porter Jr., a big third year for him. And I also love now he has in this room, he gets to learn from Darius Slay and Jalen Ramsey. What a freaking benefit to Joey Porter Jr., who, let's just face it, had his ups and downs in his second season. He did not take that step forward from year one, where he was also pretty streaky, but he was even a little bit worse in year two. I think he got flagged even more. Already got flagged 12 times in his rookie season, but 17 times in 2024. He's always going to be a grabby corner. That is his play style. He wants to kind of model his game after, say, a Shavarius Ward or even like a Sauce Gardner, where he is going to get away with some of that grabbiness. But I think learning from Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay how to be a little bit more subtle about it could actually go a really long way for him. I mean, getting flagged 17 times is just not going to work. So I still think the up arrow should be pointing up, obviously, on Joey Porter. The first pick in the second round in 2023, who I thought was every bit a first round caliber corner. And in his rookie season, as far as rookie corners are concerned, he was better and very promising. So I think he can get back on track. It's just getting some of that confidence and improving the technique with his grabbiness a little bit more. But needless to say, a big year 3 for him. We'll see what they can get from him. But then Darius Slay, I think this is a really good spot for him, because when they do play that 25-30% of their snaps in that base defense, Slay's going to be able to get a breather. He's going to be able to come off the field. He's not going to be exposed to as many hits in the run game, where I think you are more susceptible to injuries. And he can just kind of play in space, come out as their third down or passing downs corner. In many ways, he is their nickel corner, in the sense of he is the corner that comes in their nickel packages, if that makes sense, though he will play outside. I think that's a great spot for a 33-year-old corner that, still showed he can play last year. Another one of these guys that, is he what he used to be? No, of course not. Darius Slay in his prime was a top 5 corner, but he was an elite athlete. And you get a little bit older, you slow down a little bit, you lose a little bit of that athletic twitch, but you come down from athleticism to still be a good enough athlete. He can still absolutely play. And there were moments in that Eagles playoff run where you're just shaking your head like, dude, we forget about the fact that Darius Slay is like the 9th best defender on that Eagles defense last year. And he's still, on many teams, would be your CB1. So really just a nice addition. I like that, and I really like it pairing it with the Jalen Ramsey addition, and how these two guys' skill sets will be perfect together. So a really fun trio of corners. And then they do have some depth. Brandon Echols was brought in here and was going to be competing for a starting job before they were able to land Jalen Ramsey. He had some good snaps for the Jets last year. He's got a lot of speed. He's a young guy that was very raw coming out, but now out of his rookie contract, I think he was a decent dart throw to make. And now for him to be kind of a dime corner, if you have an opponent who has a speed threat at wide receiver, Not necessarily like a Tyreek Hill per se, but maybe like a Marquez Valdes-Scantling, or even like maybe a Xavier Worthy for the Chiefs, or even like, Darius Slayton, like that designated deep threat. If you're worried about playing a lot of single high and leaving Joey Porter Jr., who's got decent speed but not great speed, or an older Darius Slay, if you're worried about sticking that guy on an island with the speed threat of the opponent, you can be smart about it and rotate in Brandon Echols and deal with the speed threats, because he is a guy with like, I want to say he ran in the 4.2s, if not the low 4.3s. But a decent enough signing is depth for sure. You also have Beanie Bishop, who I think they were relatively prepared to start in the slot. That's more in the realm of replacement level slot players that they've been living in for the last few years. They are quite happy to be upgrading there, but he has shown some real flashes in coverage. Aaron Rodgers is certainly happy that he doesn't have to throw against Beanie Bishop in a real game, because he baited him in their matchup last year on a really beautiful interception. But he's now good depth. You wouldn't love him as a starter, but yeah, good depth. And then James Pierre has played as well. He's kind of a nice backup to Joey Porter as a physical scrapper at corner. You even have Corey Trice, who, if he could stay healthy, could be a matchup corner, an interesting draft pick that would have gone much, much higher if he didn't have medical concerns coming out. Unfortunately, those have followed him in the league, but if he could stay healthy, I would imagine they could find a way to use him. And then Dante Kent, they spent a 7th-round pick on, profiles as a slot player, but tested really, really well. So a lot of depth in this cornerback room. Not all these guys are going to make it, frankly. So we'll see how that all plays out. Now, I do think this is a top 10 secondary strictly off of the cornerback trio, but they fall into that next tier where they do rank 12th to 14th for the DB coverage grade. They fall into that next tier because the safety group just isn't really anything special. They extend Deshaun Elliott after he was a nice pickup for them. I love the physical presence he brings to this team. He's more of a contribution in run defense than he is in coverage, but he made some really impactful stops coming downhill. I do think he's going to play a lot more free safety this year, which is fine, but he's not going to show a ton of range or playmaking ability on the back end. It's probably going to be very much like, hey, go play deeper than the deepest. Don't take a ton of risks. Find yourself in a position and secure the tackle. So I just don't think he's going to be that big of an impact, especially on passing downs. But yeah, he's still a good overall player. Just doesn't really move the needle. And then, yeah, Juan Thornhill's your other safety. Was just very kind of adequate for Cleveland. Played a lot of slot corner in college. He's got the traits, but has never really put it all together consistently from a coverage perspective, and is far from an impact as a run defender, though he's solid there. I think for him to be your second safety that comes in on nickel defenses, which is going to be about 70% of the time, it's okay. But again, I do expect Jalen Ramsey to be safety too in their base defensive looks. Honestly, though, where this could go up is Sebastian Castro, my dude out of Iowa, who I think finished as my number 6 safety in this draft class. I had a late 3rd, early 4th round grade on him, and I couldn't believe he went undrafted. The amount of guys that just ran fast, that got drafted at the safety position ahead of Sebastian Castro, who has multiple years of just really good tape. I get it. He's a little bit smaller. He played a lot of slot corner at Iowa. Yeah, he ran a 4.58. You know who also runs a 4.58? Most of the best safeties in the league. Jesse Bates, Kyle Hamilton, Xavier McKinney. Ever heard of those guys? Yeah, speed is not as important at safety as you think. So the fact that he went undrafted is unbelievable to me. To pick him up as an undrafted free agent out of Iowa, the Steelers have had a strong connection to that program over the years. And, can you not just picture it? I mean, there is such a long run of players coming out of Iowa that did essentially the same role, whether it's Amani Hooker, who's turned into a good safety for the Titans, Micah Hyde, Geno Stone had a little bit of a breakout in this division for the Ravens. I see Sebastian Castro somewhere in that cluster, and if he earns a starting role over Juan Thornhill in training camp, you heard it here first. I think he provides better depth than people realize because he was an undrafted free agent, but this was, to me, one of the undrafted steals in the entire league, and I would absolutely love to see him carve out a role here because I think he can play that slot safety role that I think Juan Thornhill projects into Castro should be more than comfortable doing that. So big fan of that addition. And then you got Miles Kilbrew, who's been around here. He's played a little bit on defense, but more of a special teams presence, and Quindell Johnson. I still think they could entertain adding another safety to this group, whether it's a Julian Blackmon or something like that. I think Justin Simmons is still hanging out there. There's not really any needle movers out there that I would even consider too much of an upgrade over Juan Thornhill. But to at least have a little bit more certainty in terms of depth might feel comfortable for the Steelers. So just get ahead on that in case they do add somebody, because other than Castro, they don't really have any depth. I do consider Killebrew more of a special teamer. But yeah, just to recap, they come in 12th to 14th for DB coverage. Room for that to go up if Joey Porter can take a leap. They could certainly get into the top 10. And then maybe, Sebastian Castro too could be a surprise. But they are inside the first tier of teams for DB run support in the top 8 of NFL teams in that category, thanks to the Jalen Ramsey addition. But I hinted at it earlier, the Steelers do come in quite high for my overall defensive ranking, second in the NFL. Second in pass defense with that outstanding pass rush, and then a little bit lower, 8th in run defense, which is kind of emblematic of where they were last year, where they were 7th in pass defense and 13th in run defense. I think with some of those additions on the D-line, bringing better secondary players into this, it makes sense how they could be even better than they were last year, and this absolutely could be the best defense in the NFL. They're already not far off of it, and they have lots of guys with the arrow pointing up and a good coaching staff to get them there. Let's discuss the special teams now before we tie everything together here in terms of offseason changes with the special teams to round out our offseason changes graphic. Really no changes here, although they might release Cordarrelle Patterson. He's a roster bubble guy. Because frankly, he is 34 years old and isn't the kick returner, honestly, like a legendary kick returner, arguably the best kick returner in NFL history. Reminder, I said kick returner, not punt returner, to the Bears fans listening. But yeah, he just is getting older, and if he doesn't quite have the traits that he once had, he might end up getting released here. So that could be a potential loss, quote unquote, from what they had last year, though he didn't really do much in terms of kick returns last year. He did return some kicks, but didn't do much with them. But at the end of the day, the Steelers rank out really well for my special teams formula. They come in as my second overall special teams. So that comes from the PFF team grade from last year, where they were 11th in the NFL. The DVOA team grade, they were second. Their kicker grade with Chris Boswell, he had the second overall grade there. So very favorable in those metrics. The punter is a little bit lower. We'll actually kind of see who is the punter for them between Cameron Johnston and Corliss Waitman. Looks like they're going to have a little bit of a camp battle there. But that kind of is what it is. I'm not really worried about it, but you don't have any star punters in the building. So they came in 22nd for the overall punter grade. The returner grade is solid, 6th to 13th, kind of B grades across the board. Cordarrelle Patterson, we mentioned him getting older, not quite what he used to be. But then Calvin Austin is an excellent punt returner as well. So they do have some return men in there. I think between Austin and maybe Kenneth Gainwell could step into the kick returner roles. Like, they're going to still have some good contributions from the return men. And then they also have that top 5 overall coaching culture ranking as well that we mentioned off the bat. That is a benefit of the doubt slider that works in the Steelers' favor here as well. So excellent special teams here in Pittsburgh. But that takes us to our final team summary on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let's begin by recapping their strengths, weaknesses, and some of those pivotal wildcard factors for this team. So this team does have legitimate strengths. The defensive line, no doubt, is already a strength and could be even better, which is crazy. But the overall coaching and culture is definitely a strength, and it has been a strength for this Steelers team. They have been the definition of earning the benefit of the doubt over the years, and I would say they have more to work with this year than they have in years past. And then special teams as well, as we mentioned, is a legitimate strength for whatever that's worth. The beauty of the Steelers team, though, is they don't really have defining weaknesses either, as so many of our teams that we've revealed to this point have. I think the ancillary wide receivers are a potential issue when they have to get into their true drop back passing game. It's DK Metcalf and not a whole lot of other reliable down the field targets. So that could show up as an issue. And then the linebacker run defense, it's not enough to hold this team back from having a really good run defense. Again, we ranked them 8th for run defense as a team. But even in kind of a dream year 2 from Peyton Wilson, it's still tough to imagine this team being great from that position against the run, and maybe holds them back from having a lockdown run defense. But then those critical wild card factors that, if things can come together, could really help this team go on a run. Or inversely, if some of the question marks on these units go in the wrong direction, could lead to more of a disappointing season for the Steelers. I really just look at the trench play. Both the offensive line and the defensive line have questions to a degree, especially with the offensive line. Like, there's a downside to this group. If development doesn't come with this unit, you are talking about an older, immobile Aaron Rodgers back there behind a team that we ranked near the bottom in pass protection. So you need that development to come along. But the developmental upside of that group, as we talked about, is outstanding. So if that can be closer to a top 10 offensive line, which I don't think is outrageous to suggest that as a possibility, given how talented that unit is, that can really help this Steelers offense actually make some noise. And then the D line is a wild card, not necessarily with the downside that we suggested with the offensive line potentially, but I think it is a wild card in the sense of like, okay, it's a great unit right now, but you do have some question marks there with age between Hayward and Watt with the regression he showed last year. Where do those things land? And then the 2 young pieces on the interior of the defensive line. There is a wider range of outcomes for that defensive line. I think if things go wrong, you could see that group being more of just a top 10 unit, in which case the defense isn't nearly as potent as you would maybe hope. So the D-line's never going to be a weakness for them, but there are some question marks with that unit, as we've discussed. So again, to wrap this all up, they ranked 25th offensively heading into next year, 2nd on defense. I do think with the moves they made, they invited some upside here. They maybe opened up some added questions to this team, which leads to especially like the floor of having the 25th overall offense. But yeah, man, if this could be the number 1 defense in the NFL, and if they could just be the 17th or 18th best offense in the league and get some things to go right with the offensive line and Caleb Johnson to be good and Aaron Rodgers to just play pretty well for them, I actually do think there is a needle to be thread for this to be the best version of the Steelers team that we've seen. It's tough. In the AFC, you got to get through Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Joe Burrow, 2 of which in your own damn division. If this team was in the NFC, maybe they would have a clearer path to being a sneaky kind of championship contender. But we have seen teams surprise and go on a run and get some things to go their way in the playoffs, and maybe the tide could turn for the Steelers this season. Let's finish up by taking a look at their schedule, though, and ask how realistic that is. I look at this, and they do have an easy start to their schedule for the most part. I have them favored in 5 out of their first 8 games, and just modest underdogs, not big underdogs in the other 3 against Minnesota, at Cincinnati, and Green Bay at home. Obviously, Rodgers is going to have a lot to play for in that game, but I do think this team can set themselves up well to start hot. I think they can start 5-3 or 6-2 relatively easy with the way that their season's starting. But it's the second half of the schedule where they're going to have to really prove that they've kind of hit some of these green lights with their question marks, because things ramp up. You've got road games against Baltimore and Detroit and at the Chargers. You have to host the Bengals. You have to host the Bills. You have to host the Ravens as well. That's the meat and bones of your schedule right there, is the second half of the season. So things might get off to a peachy start for this team, but certainly don't take any victory laps if they start 6-2, because we're saying it right now before the season ever begins. That's almost expected. It's how they finish the season that's going to matter here. Their over-under, if you look at their Vegas odds, is 8.5. And based on the math with how hard the second half of their schedule is, They actually came in with the math projection for this series lower than that at 7.4 wins. I would not touch the under for this team. I am not betting against a Mike Tomlin team to at least get to 9-8. That said, it's not my favorite bet in terms of value because of how hard their division is and how the schedule is down the stretch. Honestly, where I think the value is on betting the Steelers might be those 40-1 Super Bowl odds. I think you talk especially about how this defense is shaping up and how they could really surprise on that side of the ball and, not just be a top 10 defense, but be an elite defense, be one of these kind of all-decade types of defenses. It's not a guarantee that they can hit that, but if things really go right with the D-line and the secondary, it's possible. It is possible. And in that case, you don't need the offense to be special. You just need them to control the clock, run the scheme the way it's designed, not be forced out of that game script because the defense is keeping games so close. And yeah, maybe they get a couple lucky bounces in the playoffs and this is the year. I don't know. Maybe that's overly optimistic for this Steelers team led by a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. Needless to say, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on today's deep dive. How many wins do you think the Steelers get this year? Do you think this team could surprise this season? But also, who do you think comes next with the number 18 ranking in this series? Thank you so much, you guys, for watching. We will see you within the next few days for that next deep dive. Until then, if you could hit that like button on the way out, if you haven't yet, it really does help me out. And I will see you soon. Peace out.